If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
I didn't know exactly what I expected would happen after my terrible car accident, but it certainly wasn't this. Of that much, I was sure. One moment, I was in the middle of the street, bleeding out, and the next. Well, the next, I was standing in an endless white void. Needless to say, confusion clouded my mind quite heavily. How could it not? However, before I could gather my thoughts on this entire situation, a raspy voice broke the silence, startling the hell out of me. "Welcome to the afterlife, kid," the voice drawled, dripping with a mix of sarcasm and a distinctive sense of not giving a flying fuck about anything. I turned to see an old man with disheveled grey hair, a lab coat, and a permanent scowl etched onto his face. The old man took a swig from a flask, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and gave me a lopsided grin. Was God cosplaying Rick Sanchez? Wait, was God Rick Sanchez? Who are you? I asked, wondering if this was hell, or heaven. I mean, I was never an overly religious guy, so I had no idea what to expect. Even if I did, I imagined my expectations to be by my religion's standards. Then again, considering there were many religions out there, chances were I would be wrong anyway. The old man rolled his eyes. "I'm God, obviously. And before you ask, no, this isn't some dream or hallucination. You're dead. Kaput. Finito." I blinked. I already knew that, but I might have leaned into the coma angle of this weird dream. So, what happens now? Now that I think about it, I was glad he hadn't sugar-coated it. The strange-looking god shrugged. "Usually, this is the part where I tell you about heaven, hell, and all that jazz. But let's skip the boring stuff. I'm feeling generous today. How about a second chance?" My eyes widened. Was I about to pull a Jesus? A second chance? You mean I get to go back? God waved a hand dismissively. "Nah, not back. That timeline's done for you. But I can send you somewhere else. Think of it as reincarnation, but with a twist. You'll get a fresh start, new world, new rules. Maybe some cool powers if I'm in the mood." "Ice guys are a thing?" I asked, holding back a chuckle. "And why me, for that matter?" God chuckled. "They sure fucking are. I invented them. And as for why you? Why not? You think there's some grand cosmic plan? Pfft. I'm bored, and this sounds entertaining. So, what's it gonna be? You in, or you wanna take your chances with the afterlife roulette?" I didn't need to think twice. I didn't want to die, and having a second chance seemed fun. "I'm in." "Attaboy," God said with a smirk, pulling out a strange device that looked like a cross between a remote control and a Game Boy. "Let's make this interesting. How about we decide your powers game show style?" Before I could respond, a large, colorful roulette wheel materialized in front of me, complete with flashing lights and a big, gaudy sign that read "Spin to win." God gestured to the wheel like a cheesy talk show host. "Step right up and give it a spin. Who knows what you'll get?" I stepped forward and grabbed the handle. With a deep breath, I gave it a good spin. The wheel whirred, the lights flashing in a dizzying array of colors. As it slowed down, I could see various names of powers and abilities on the segments: super strength, telekinesis, invisibility. My heart pounded with anticipation. The wheel clicked to a stop on a segment that read "The powers of Teresa." "Who the fuck is Teresa?" God muttered, scratching his head. "A nun or something. The name feels like it belongs to a Catholic nun." He shrugged. "Guess we'll find out." "Well, good luck, kid. Try not to die too quickly, otherwise, it would mean I wasted my time with all of this. Anywho, off you go." With a snap of his fingers, the white void disappeared, and I felt myself falling, hurtling towards my new life in an unfamiliar world. The sensation of falling was both terrifying and exhilarating. The white void gave way to darkness, and the next thing I knew, I was enveloped in warmth. It felt as if I was floating in a cocoon, my senses dulled yet somehow aware of a distant rhythm. A heartbeat? No, several heartbeats. I tried to open my eyes, but I couldn't. Wait, why couldn't I open my eyes? And why did everything sound so muffled? I tried to move but felt an odd resistance all around me. It was as if I was submerged in some thick fluid. Panic started to creep in, and I flailed my limbs, trying to make sense of my surroundings. Alright, where the hell am I? I thought, confused as to where that fucker of a god had sent me. I took stock of my situation. Warmth, a rhythmic heartbeat, muffled sounds, and a distinct lack of mobility. Could it be? No way. There was no way I was. Am I in a fucking womb? Oh. My. God. That bastard did say reincarnation, but this? This was beyond the pale. I tried to make sense of my surroundings. The fluid, the rhythmic sounds, the muffled voices from outside. It was like something out of a bizarre sci-fi movie. Then it hit me, I was literally starting from scratch. From the very beginning. As a baby. Seriously. I thought, or tried to think. It came out as more of a mental scream. Reincarnation with a twist, you said. You didn't mention the twist was prenatal. I settled into my new reality, trying to find some humor in the situation. Well, I guess this gives a new meaning to the term reborn. The muffled sounds became more distinct, and I realized they were voices. I couldn't understand a lick of what they were saying. There were 4 people outside this amniotic prison. Wait, how the fuck do I know that? I can feel them? I can hear one of them speaking, but the other 3 I can feel them? How can I feel them? Why can I feel them? What is going on? Oh fuck. Some of the fluid got in my mouth. Chapter 2, Rebirth. Quite literally. As the days went by in this watery prison, I started to notice something troubling. Time was slipping by, and with it, my memories were fading. With each blink, it felt like weeks were passing. It was as if my life was stuck on fast forward, and I couldn't find the remote control to slow it down. At first, it was small things. I couldn't remember my favorite movie. Then I forgot the name of my high school. But now, it was getting worse. I tried to recall my old name, the one I had before coming here. It was right there on the tip of my tongue, but it slipped away like sand through my fingers. Every time I blinked, it felt like chunks of time were disappearing. I tried to keep a hold of myself, trying to hold on to my memories, but it was no use. The harder I tried, the faster they seemed to vanish. It was frustrating, to say the least. In an attempt to counter whatever was happening to me, I began to keep a mental tally of the things I could still remember. My favorite food, pizza, my favorite color, black, and my favorite hobby, reading. But as much as this had helped at first, the list kept getting shorter. It felt like my brain was a chalkboard, and someone kept wiping it clean, bit by bit. There were things that still remained, though. I knew I wasn't from this world. I knew I had been offered a second chance by some sort of deity or demon. I knew I had been an adult at one point in time. I knew this life I was given was not without dangers. I knew a lot of things. But the question was, for how long? Time passed once more, with a blink of an eye, and my sense of self seemed to be eroding away. I found myself standing on the precipice of non-existence, a strange sensation of understanding your existence yet not knowing the very essence that creates you. It was like looking at a reflection in murky water. I could vaguely see myself, but not clearly. It wouldn't be long now. It wouldn't be long before I escaped this cage, this womb. I could feel it. Then again, what did I know about these things? The passage of time had become so disorienting that I couldn't tell any more. I clung to the few memories I still had, repeating them like a mantra. Surprisingly, I could still remember a big part of a few selected things. Some anime, for example. Though I had forgotten most of Naruto Shippuden by now, a shame, considering it had been my favorite anime. I think I still remembered the first part of the anime, so it wasn't all bad. By now, I could hear voices more clearly. My parents, I assumed, were talking about their hopes and dreams for me. The funny part was that despite not understanding them, I could feel their excitement and what they were trying to convey. It gave me something to focus on, something to anchor me in this ever-shifting nightmare. I wasn't sad anymore. The memories of my past life were almost completely gone, leaving behind only vague impressions and emotions. It was like trying to grasp smoke. And well, you can't miss what you don't remember loving. How odd is that? We treasure something that, once lost, is completely useless. How ironic. When I opened my eyes again, the first thing I saw was dazzling light. It grew to encompass my entire field of vision, making me squint in discomfort. Once my vision adjusted, I became aware of a blue-haired young lady gazing at me. Blue? Well, that's a weird color. I couldn't see her well beyond the hair, but I could feel her, or rather something around her, a pulsing stream of energy that somehow seemed familiar, wrapping around me like a warm blanket. The room was filled with it, this powerful, familiar presence, and I realized it wasn't just her. There were others also, their energy intermingling, creating a chain of vibrations that hummed through my every fiber. It was strange. By her side, I could feel a man of roughly the same age as her, his hair black, his awkward smile directed at me. I couldn't detail his physique, but he seemed somewhat muscular. The pulsing stream of energy around him was bigger, stronger, and wilder than what I had perceived from the woman. His energy felt warm, comforting, a soothing balm that eased the sudden unease I was feeling. How strange, it seems their presence gives me a sense of comfort. Could it be, they are my new parents? I chuckled inwardly at the thought. I might have lost a lot of memories during this reincarnation process, but I still held more than enough, to find this entire situation a bit strange. The woman looked at me with a warm smile and spoke. Her words were oddly indistinct and difficult to make out. They weren't speaking English, that might be a problem. It sounded like Japanese. I had seen enough anime to learn a word or two, and I was almost certain the woman was calling me cute. The man said something in reply, his energy losing some of its tension. I had no idea what he had replied, but good for him for relaxing. The one that's supposed to be freaking out here is me. I'm the one that was forced into a womb and then evicted from it. On that thought, I wonder where I am? As I mulled over this, the strange energy in the room shifted. The once soothing hum of emotions became a flurry of vibrations and anxiety, each one crashing against me like a wave. I couldn't understand what was happening, but I could feel their worry robbing the room of its tranquility. I peeked through semi-closed eyes at the woman, my supposed mother. She was biting her lip, and her once serene blue-eyed gaze was now turbulent, mirroring the storm of energy swirling around me. She was worried, but why? That's when it hit me. I hadn't made a sound since I was born, not a single cry. The familiar wail of a newborn was noticeably absent. It's no wonder their energy was tinged with worry. They thought something was wrong with their baby. In my past life, I had witnessed the birth of my niece and remembered the relief that washed over us when she let out her first cry, the signal that she was breathing properly. If that held true here as well, then my silence must be unsettling. Understanding dawned on me. Even with their muted energies now screaming anxiety and concern into my being, it all made sense. It would be strange, unnatural even, for a newborn not to cry. What's more, an unsettling omen for the parents who anticipated their child's first audible affirmation of life. With a sigh, I decided to break my silence. After all, I didn't want them to worry unnecessarily on my account. My mind was still foggy with the experiences of my former life, but I knew enough to understand that this was important. So, pulling together all the strength I possessed in my tiny being, I let out a cry. A small wail at first, a squeak really, that escalated into a full-blown newborn's bawl. The room stilled. I sensed the strange energy shift again, this time easing from a buzzing tension into a tangible relief that flooded the room like the sun breaking through dark clouds. My cry had acted as the soothing balm, restoring temporary peace in their souls and in the room. I deserved an Oscar. Chapter 3, Baby Steps. It has been a few months since my rebirth. Thus far, I have been able to discover a few things, not much, mind you, but enough to get a general idea of what I was dealing with. Apparently, I'd been reborn in the world of Naruto, more specifically, Konoha, pretty much confirming this entire thing was an isekai. That simple realization alone had confirmed a few suspicions that had been gnawing at me since I came into existence in this strange new world. For one, it answered the question of what language the people around me were speaking, Japanese. And two, it also answered my question as to what exactly I was feeling around me. The strange energy that seemed to be in every single person I had met thus far, a force pulsing and throbbing with life, was chakra. I traced my fingers in the air, feeling the soft hum of the energy around me. It was not just within the individuals, this place breathed chakra too. The earth under the village pulsed with it, the animals, the water, everything had a bit of chakra in it. Another thing I had discovered was that my personality had changed. I was no longer the frazzled, anxious person I remembered being in my past life. I was now calm, serene even, with all of this. Not that I was totally different, mind you. It wasn't a complete 180-degree turn in my character, but more like an evolution, I suppose. Some aspects of my old self were still there in the core, as solid as oak, while others had faded away like smoke in the wind. Talking about fading away, my memories had stopped fading. I had still lost a big chunk of my past life, but now, I didn't wake up each morning with less than I'd had before the drain had been plugged. The only thing I regretted was the fact I had forgotten about what happened in Shippuden. It would have been very helpful to remember that, but I suppose beggars can't be choosers. I'd have to make do with the scraps of my remembered knowledge. Besides, it wasn't all bad. I still remembered the first part of the anime, before they grew up and stuff, so that ought to be worth something. Then again, I had no idea where in the general timeline I was, but I suppose I'll find out. In the meantime, I suppose I ought to relearn how to walk. A few months later. After months of listening to the people around me, I'd begun to pick up some of the language. And I had to say, I was learning Japanese at an unnatural pace. Maybe my new brain was better suited to learning, or maybe it was the fact I was only interacting with the language in question. Whatever the case might be, it felt like I had an unusual knack for remembering things now. Well, they do say newborns and kids have sponges for brains, maybe they weren't far off. By now, I had also learned how to crawl, and walk, kind of. Keeping the balance was still a bit of a challenge. Occasionally, my stubby legs would give way under me, sending me sprawling onto the tatami mats. Be that as it may, I was grateful to have recovered some semblance of control in my movements. Being carried around was an indignity I was happy to do without. Not that my new parents had stopped carrying me around, but now that I had some control over my body, the amount of time I spent in their arms had thankfully decreased. Another thing I had learned was my new name. Takeshi Arita, or is it Arita Takeshi? I don't remember how they orient names in Japan, but either way, it had a nice ring to it. He always looks so serious, isn't he cute? My mother, my Arita, cooed, her fingers combing tenderly through my hair. He's practicing for the ladies, my father, Arita Yoshiro, chuckled, ruffling my already tousled hair with a loving touch. Just watch. He'll be a heartbreaker. I scowled at his words, silver eyes flashing in mild irritation. It wasn't that it bothered me that he said that. It's that he said it, every single day, multiple times. By now, it was simply annoying. But enough about that. Let's talk about what I have learned. Our house was located close to the Uchiha district, a section of the village that was, for lack of a better term, prestigious. Apparently, my father made decent money as a well-respected blacksmith in the village, allowing us to reside within close proximity to one of the big clans. He was a shinobi as well but had retired due to a permanent injury, or so I had gathered from the snippets of conversations I had heard. My mother, on the other hand, worked for the administration in the Hokage Tower. She was a ninja, like the old man, but it seemed she never went on active duty. I was fine with this arrangement. Their professions meant they spent a lot of time at home with me, providing me ample opportunities to pick up nuances of the language and local customs. "Who's my hungry little lion?" My cooed, holding up a spoon filled with mashed potatoes as she lifted me off the ground with one hand. I watched her suspiciously, making her giggle. "Don't pout, Takeshi. It tastes good." "Oh well, I am hungry, and mashed potatoes sound good." As I ate, I contemplated what awaited me in the future. I knew I would eventually be enrolled in the academy. From there, it would only be a matter of time before I had to kill someone. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. I wasn't scared of the prospect, that much I knew, but other than that, I didn't know. I guess that's a problem for future me. Present me has some potatoes to devour. Chapter 4, Uchiha Taki, but tiny. It had been roughly 3 years since I'd been reincarnated. By now, I could naturally talk and walk without a problem. I had also learned how to read, because it was that or going crazy, seeing the amount of things my new parents would allow me to partake in was heavily limited, leaving a big chunk of space I desperately needed to fill therefore, reading. I had learned a lot by reading. A lot about the shinobi world, a lot about chakra, a lot about shinobi. Nothing too in-depth, seeing the books I could get my hands on were, civilian books, but enough to give me a general idea of the world I now lived in. I was particularly fascinated by the history of Konoha. A thought that never crosses people's minds when watching the anime is, how young Konoha is for a nation. To put it into perspective, my grandfather met the first Hokage, and the man isn't even in his 70s. The first Hokage had died only a little over 30 years ago, which, sure, is a considerable amount of time, but it's like saying Abraham Lincoln was shot 30-something years ago in our world. It's mind-boggling to think about. Point 1. Then there's the fact that this world experienced 2 world wars in the span of 20 years. 20 years. In just 2 decades, the shinobi world had been shattered and rebuilt, not once but twice. The number of casualties was staggering, each name etched into the memorial stone a grim reminder of the price we had paid in blood and sorrow. The pattern of violence and chaos seemed to be woven so deeply into the fabric of this accursed world that it was difficult to imagine a time of peace. It was an unnerving thought for a child to have, but I was no ordinary child, was I? I couldn't help but wonder how Naruto managed to bring this chaotic world into the realm of peace. I had lost so many memories that I could barely remember anything about Naruto, or about my past life for that matter. That being said, I reckon I remembered enough to guide me through the first arc of the series, which was useless seeing Shippuden was where the real lore was. I sighed. I could always try to guess how Naruto managed to push this world into peace. Maybe he trapped everyone in a happy genjutsu, an end of story. I chuckled at the thought. Naruto making genjutsus, that's something I don't need my memories to know, it's impossible. But enough about that. There was only so much I could deduce from fragmented knowledge. Besides, chances were I wasn't even going to interact with the timeline as I originally imagined. Why? Well, by now I had all but confirmed I had been reincarnated before the main cast was even born. By how much? No idea, but seeing the 3rd Hokage was, well, still the Hokage, and there wasn't a thing like the 4th Hokage yet, it was safe to surmise that I had a head start. A significant one at that, unless time in this world worked differently, or my calculations were off. The thought was sobering though. More time meant more room for growth before things started to go south. Takeshi, sweetie, my mother's voice wafted through the thin paper walls of our home as she walked into my room. Your father and I thought you might enjoy an afternoon in the park playing with the other kids. I would rather not. The park meant kids, and kids meant me having murderous thoughts. Kids were annoying, dirty, and all in all, a total waste of space and time. I would rather enjoy my afternoon reading with a cup of juice, but I knew how these two were, and while I knew they were absolutely proud of the fact that I was shaping up to be a prodigy, as they called me, I also knew they were worried about the fact I had no friends. I sighed. Sure, sounds delightful. I pushed myself off the wooden floor, placing the book I'd been engrossed in aside. It wasn't a particularly interesting book, just a generic story with predictable plot twists and shallow characters. But again, it was infinitely better than facing the unpredictability of children. Wonderful, Mother beamed, clapping her hands together in delight. I'll pack you a snack. A snack, you say? Well, now the benefit to cost ratio of this adventure is rising. And some cookies. I ventured, my eyes brightening at the prospect. Mother chuckled, ruffling my hair affectionately. Of course, darling. She said, a warm note of relief seeping into her voice. The park was as I remembered, vibrant and full of life. Children's laughter echoed throughout, mingling with the rustle of leaves in the wind. A group of kids were playing ninja, their tiny feet pattering against the sand while others were engaged in a mock fight. A few parents watched on, their faces lit with fond amusement. With a resigned sigh, I seated myself at the fringe of the playground, watching the other children cavort with wistful detachment. Their innocent merriment was so far removed from my own reality, it was almost like observing another species. But I reminded myself this was precisely why my parents had encouraged this, to socialize. Couldn't they be content with the fact that I wasn't out there killing pets or something? I sighed again. I might as well get this over with. The sooner I engage in this mission, the sooner I'll be able to retreat back to my solitary haven. Besides, I owe it to my mother to try. I mean, I had taken the payment of snacks and cookies for this, so it was my duty to fulfill the mission to the best of my abilities. So, I donned my best smile, the one that didn't show too much of my reluctance, and ambled over to the gaggle of children playing ninjas. They were circled around 2 boys, eagerly engaged in a mock battle of throwing sand and sticks while mimicking martial arts moves they'd probably seen from their parents. Hi, I greeted, injecting as much warmth as I could muster into the single syllable. The circle of children paused, their energetic chatter dwindling off. The boys in the center halted their pretend battle and all heads swiveled to look at me. One of the boys, the taller one with a shock of orange hair and freckles, squinted at me suspiciously. Who are you? He asked, his tone challenging. Well, isn't he a ray of sunshine? Arita Takeshi, I replied coolly, brushing away a stray lock of hair from my forehead. How old are you? You are tiny, like a midget, the kid snickered, his eyes darting to his comrades for shared amusement. Well, fuck you, buddy. I'm 3.5. I'm supposed to be tiny, I replied, with a faint smile. I came to play. The statement seemed to hang uncomfortably in the air for a moment, their young faces studying me with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The freckled boy laughed again, a grating sound that was swiftly picked up by his sidekicks. Play? Why would we play with a baby? I'm asking myself the same question. Oh wait, right, my mother bribed me to come here and play. You're too young to even know what a real ninja is, unlike us. One of the... I don't know, background characters added with a prideful smile. Am I now? I replied, a faint smile gracing my face. I wonder if giving up at this point would count as me trying to actually socialize. Some lawyers might argue in my favor. He can play the bad guy, one of the background characters suggested, a toothy grin on his face as he nudged the freckled boy. I didn't miss the implications of their words. In their play, the bad guy always got defeated at the end. Meaning they wanted me to play the part of the punch bag. How adorably cruel of them. I could deny such a request, but, sometimes the best strategy was to play along until you found a gap in the enemy's defenses, or at least that's what my book on simple ninja tactics says. Why not? I shrugged nonchalantly. I can be the bad guy. It sounds fun. The freckled boy's grin widened. He strutted up to me, puffing out his chest in an exaggerated display of bravado. You are now our enemy, baby, he declared, pointing a chubby finger at my chest, his other hand holding a stick. That much was already established, I replied, standing still as the circle of kids began to close in around me. They brandished their sticks and assumed exaggerated fighting stances, clearly excited to have a new bad guy to defeat. The freckled boy took the lead, charging at me with his stick held high. He swung it down, but I sidestepped effortlessly, watching as he stumbled forward, off balance. Another kid lunged at me from the side, but I ducked under his wild swing. Their movements were so painfully obvious that I didn't even need to see the flow of their chakra. One by one, the kids tried to tag me, their movements clumsy and uncoordinated. I dodged them all with ease, almost as if we were dancing. They laughed and shouted, their attacks becoming more frantic as they realized they couldn't land a single hit. He's fast! One of the boys exclaimed, panting as he tried to catch his breath. The freckled boy scowled, clearly frustrated. Come on, guys! We can't let him win. He rallied his friends for another assault, but I continued to evade them, with little to no difficulty. I couldn't help but feel a small thrill of satisfaction. Sure, I was humiliating kids, but hey, simple pleasures, simple joys. And besides, I was smaller than them, so, kudos to me. This is starting to get sad, I teased, ducking under a high swing and tapping the freckled boy on the head as I slipped past him. I thought the good guys were supposed to win. The kids redoubled their efforts, but it was no use. I weaved through their attacks, sidestepping and dodging with a grace that made them look slow and lumbering. It was almost comical how easily I could predict their movements. Soon, their playful shouts turned into frustrated grumbles. They were tiring themselves out, their attacks becoming slower with each passing minute. Their faces were flushed red from the exertion and one by one, they began to give up, huffing in defeat. You cheated! The freckled boy shouted, his face red, before running away to whom I assumed was his mother. Did I? I muttered to myself, a small smirk playing on my lips. I suppose in their eyes I had, after all, how else had a toddler humiliated them so much? Your skills are commendable, a soft voice echoed behind me. A new figure emerged from the shadows of a nearby tree, his onyx eyes holding an intense gaze that immediately captured my attention. He was around the same age as me, but he carried an air of maturity that was noticeably absent in the others. Thank you, I responded, turning to face him fully. His dark hair hung loosely around his face, shadowing his eyes slightly. He seemed different from the rest, not just in the way he carried himself, but in the way he observed and analyzed. I am Arita Takeshi, I introduced myself. Uchiha Itaki, the mysterious kid replied, inclining his head slightly in a respectful nod. I guess this answers when exactly in the timeline I am. On that thought. You know, he's not what I expected for a cold-blooded murderer who is destined to eliminate his own clan for no other reason than testing his own might. Chapter 5, The Power of Friendship. The Uchiha compound was as I imagined, a network of traditional houses and winding pathways. It was pretty bland, to be honest, but exactly what one would expect from one of the big clans. My mother and I had been invited for tea by Mikoto Uchiha, a gesture of warmth and hospitality likely connected to the fact that she had seen Itaka talking to me in the playground instead of ignoring me like he most likely did with all the other kids. Now, I found myself in the backyard of Itaka's home, a small yet beautiful garden that seemed to be a world apart from the boring state the Uchihas lived in. I had to be honest, I found Itaka's company to be a breath of fresh air compared to the usual village children. His demeanor carried a certain depth, his words held wisdom that belied his age. It almost felt as if he was a reincarnated soul, just like me. But he wasn't. I can't help but wonder if that speaks of his immense intelligence or if I am as dumb as a 3-year-old. It's peaceful here, I remarked, breaking the silence. I gazed around, taking in the carefully tended plants and the koi pond that reflected the sky like a mirror. It is, Itaki agreed, his voice calm and steady. My mother spends a lot of time in this garden. She says it helps her find balance. I nodded, appreciating the tranquility. Balance is important. Especially in a world like this. Itaka turned his gaze to me, his dark eyes thoughtful. You're different from the other kids, he observed. Most of them are still caught up in childish games or thoughts, but you seem to understand things on a deeper level. I shrugged, a small smile playing on my lips. Maybe I'm just more of a thinker. Or maybe, he said, his gaze steady, you've seen things that forced you to grow up. Either way, I find your company interesting. I find your company tolerable as well, I replied, a playful grin touching my lips. He blinked, caught off guard by my teasing tone. His mouth twitched, hinting at a smile. Tolerable, hey? He mused, leaning back into the wooden bench we shared. Did your mother force you into going to the playground as well? More like bribed. I chuckled softly, shaking my head. Not forced, exactly. She just encourages me to interact more. She says it's important to form connections. Itaka hummed in response, a contemplative look in his eyes. Connections are indeed vital. Especially in a world of shinobi, he murmured, his eyes gazing at the swimming koi in the pond. It's our bonds with others that either strengthen or weaken us. No wonder he was labeled as the genius of his generation in the anime. I suppose that's true, I replied after a moment of contemplation. Without bonds, we're isolated. And isolation can lead to... I paused, searching for the right word. Despair, I guess. Itaka nodded, the corners of his lips turning slightly downward. The first Hokage used to say that true despair has a way of gnawing at the soul, turning light into darkness. The first Hokage used to say that? When? All the books I have about him portray him as a hothead powerhouse, not really a philosopher. Did he really say that? I asked, curiosity creeping into my voice. Itaka shrugged nonchalantly, realizing the reason behind my confusion. Perhaps he didn't say it verbatim, but the concept was something he emphasized often. The books, they do not always contain the whole truth. So, what do you do for fun around here? I asked, tilting my head. Itaka looked back at me, a bemused expression settling upon him. For fun? He repeated, as though the concept was foreign to him. Yes, I said, suppressing a laugh at his expression. You know, activities you enjoy and do for the sake of fun itself. He pondered the question for a moment, his fingers absently trailing the wood grain on the bench beneath us. Reading, he said finally. And training, and painting, occasionally. I have responsibilities that take up much of my time. I mostly read, I replied, I don't really train yet. My mom is most of the time working and my father is a retired shinobi. That, alongside the fact they consider me far too young to engage in any form of ninja training. A sigh slipped past my lips. I guess it's better this way. I mean, I don't have your obligations. Being a clan heir seemed like a drag, to be honest. I was rather content with my position as the child of a couple nobody really cared about in terms of political power. An empathetic nod came from Itaki. But, would you like to train? I would, I replied with a nod. Considering how dangerous shinobi life can be, it'd be good to at least know how to defend myself. It's a wise perspective, Itaki affirmed, his gaze drifting off towards the Uchiha compound. You're always welcome to train with me, he offered. I blinked, his answer catching me by surprise. Are you sure you can even offer that? I'm no expert in clan politics, but I know enough to understand that training non-clan members might ruffle some feathers. Itaki remained unfazed, his gaze steady as he leaned back, cradling his hands behind his head in a surprisingly casual gesture. You are right, but as the heir to this clan, it gives me certain liberties. Convincing father, the head of the clan, shouldn't be that hard. I just need to tell him that you are like me, and he will consider your presence a benefit rather than an intrusion. I suppose that makes sense. And hey, if he can get me some training under the strongest clan in Konoha, who am I to say no? You don't reject gifts. Well, if you say so, I would be happy to train with you, Itaki, I replied, a faint smile on my face. Chapter 6, 2 years later. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the Uchiha compound. Itaki and I stood in the training yard, our breaths coming in steady puffs of exertion. It had been 2 years since our first meeting, and much had changed in that time. Focus, Takeshi, Itaki's calm voice broke through my thoughts. Your stance is slipping. I nodded, adjusting my footing and tightening my grip on the wooden practice sword. We sparred every day, pushing each other to new limits. Though, if I had to say, I would say I was stronger than Itaki. While our overall skills were roughly on the same level, I had a few advantages over him. For one, my stamina was immense. I was built like a warhorse, bred for battle, able to withstand grueling hours of vicious training without tiring. Itaki, on the other hand, was more akin to a falcon, agile, swift, precise, but not built for long battles. That being said, his strikes were deadly accurate, compensating for his lack of stamina. Everything balanced out in the end. Better, he said, nodding in approval. Now, let's go again. As we clashed, the familiar sound of wood meeting wood echoed through the Uchiha yard. I couldn't help but reflect on how much my life had changed in the past 2 years. The village was no longer the peaceful place I had known as a child, not that I was ever foolish enough to believe it would last, considering the past. The Third Shinobi War had worsened, and Konoha was deeply embroiled in the conflict. 2 years ago, the war barely affected the village or its surrounding lands. But now, even here in the heart of the Leaf Village, signs of war were everywhere. Shinobi ran through the streets in battle armor, civilians grew thin and tired from rationing, and a general scent of unease hung in the air. It was hard to believe that just 2 years ago, the village's biggest concern was trading routes. Now, those concerns seemed trivial compared to the looming threat of battle. Reports of skirmishes and losses were common. One could almost smell the scent of death in the air. Itaki's training had become even more intense as the war raged on. His father, Uchiha Fugaku, who was often outside the village fighting, had impressed upon Itaki the importance of being prepared for anything. And Itaki, in turn, had passed that urgency on to me. Despite the turmoil outside the village, our training sessions provided a semblance of stability. Your movements are smoother now, Itaki remarked as he parried one of my strikes and countered with a swift, controlled thrust. I deflected it with ease, kicking him back. Thanks, I replied, a small smile tugging at my lips. You've improved a lot too. He offered a brief nod. We both have. But we can't afford to stop pushing ourselves. That much was true. The only reason we weren't fighting in the war was because we hadn't entered the academy. The council had some vested interests in the two geniuses residing within its heart. By now, the elders of Konoha knew that Itaki was a prodigy, which wasn't hard to discern, considering the Uchiha flaunted their young genius at any given opportunity. Everyone knew that Itaki held great potential, and those in power in the village desired to mold him into the perfect weapon for Konoha. As for me, my potential had caught their attention as well, mostly due to my association with Itaki and the Uchiha as a whole. So, all in all, the reason we hadn't enrolled in the academy was simple. They wanted to ensure our skills were honed in the best possible way before throwing us into the chaos of battle. In layman's terms, they could afford to lose a few shinobi here and there, but prodigies were far too precious to gamble with. Not until they had squeezed every drop of potential from us and crafted us into their perfect warriors. Things were changing, and fast. Based on how things were moving, I gave this war a year, maybe less, before it came to an end. Itaki, I said, dodging one of his strikes before taking a few steps back. Do you ever think about the future? What will happen after the war? He lowered his practice sword, his expression thoughtful. All the time. I think about what kind of world we can create when the fighting stops. Despite his age, Itaki always seemed to have a clear vision of what he wanted to achieve. It was one of the things I honestly admired most about him. I still couldn't understand how he was destined to kill his entire clan. The Itaki I knew from the anime was cold, cruel, and distant, a shadow that moved in the night. But the Itaki that stood before me now was different. His heart was too gentle, his spirit too kind. Could this boy really grow into the man I knew he would become? If I had to be honest, I didn't see a path where he would, which baffled me more than I cared to admit. I want the fighting to stop, Itaki continued, his voice softer than usual. I want to create a world where children can grow and learn without fear. A world where shinobi exist not as tools of war, but as protectors. There was no way someone like him could end up as the monster they painted him to be in the anime. That's a good goal, I replied, lifting my sword again. Let's make sure we survive long enough to see it happen. Itaki nodded, his grip tightening around his weapon. We will, he vowed, readying himself for the next round of our training session. However, before we could continue fighting, our training session was interrupted by a gentle yet firm voice. Boys, it's time to eat, Uchiha Mikoto called out from the entrance of the training yard. Chapter 7, Mikoto. That's a good goal, I replied, lifting my sword again. Let's make sure we survive long enough to see it happen. Itaki nodded, his grip tightening around his weapon. We will, he vowed, readying himself for the next round of our training session. However, before we could continue, our training session was interrupted by a gentle yet firm voice. Boys, it's time to eat, Uchiha Mikoto called out from the entrance of the training yard. Mikoto stood there with a warm smile, one hand resting on her slightly rounded belly. She was about 3 or 4 months pregnant. I wasn't entirely sure how far along she was, just that she was showing. That was something else that was new. The news of Mikoto's pregnancy had been one of the many changes in the past 2 years. The idea of Suzuki, someone who would become so pivotal in the future, being born into this war-torn world felt surreal. Knowing what I did about the future of this world, I often found myself contemplating the paths each of us would take. In the anime, it was never shown or stated that Suzuki had been born during the war, so either the anime wasn't as accurate as I would have wanted it to be, or the Third Shinobi War was really coming to an end sooner than most expected. Either way, I suppose it didn't matter. How was training today, boys? Mikoto asked as we made our way toward the dining room. Her eyes held a glimmer of motherly concern, scanning us for any injuries or signs of exhaustion. As usual, I replied, a faint smile gracing my face. Mikoto had always been kind to me, treating me like one of her own. Her calm and nurturing demeanor made the Uchiha compound feel more like a second home, which was surprising considering 99.99% of the Uchiha were egotistical assholes who looked down on anyone for whatever reason. There were a few exceptions, of course, like Mikoto, who was simply the best Uchiha, no questions asked, and Fugaku, who, despite not being exactly friendly with anyone, wasn't an outright jerk. His stern gaze often felt more like fatherly concern, hidden behind layers of traditional Uchiha pride and stoicism. You two have both been working hard, Mikoto said, her eyes twinkling with pride as she ruffled both our hair. Come, let's have lunch. You need to keep your strength up. Thank you, mother, Itaki replied, his usual stoic self softening in her presence. Thank you, Lady Mikoto, I added, bowing slightly in respect. She simply chuckled, a soft melody that brought warmth to my heart. No need to bow, Takeshi, Mikoto smiled at me warmly. You're practically family at this point. I'll keep it in mind, I replied as we entered the dining room. The table was already laid out with a spread of food that made my mouth water and my stomach grumble in response. Mikoto was a great cook, and by great I mean restaurant-worthy. How's your mother? Mikoto asked as she started serving us. She's fine. Working a bit too much, though, I answered, accepting the bowl of rice she passed me. Despite my mother not being on active duty, her work had tripled, forcing her to stay out late in the Hokage office. Maybe I should visit her, Mikoto suggested, concern etched on her face. It's been quite some time since we chatted over tea. Another thing that had changed during these past 2 years was that my mother and Mikoto were basically best friends. Before I befriended Itaki, my family had some connections to the Uchiha clan, mostly through my father, who is the main blacksmith for the clan. However, now that Itaki and I were friends, well, the once professional relationship had changed into a more personal one. Days often found my mother and Mikoto huddled over cups of steamy tea, gossiping like teenage girls. At times, they even disappeared together on what they called women-only outings, leaving me in Itaki's company at either the Uchiha compound or with my father taking care of us. I'm sure she would love it, I replied, appreciating the thought. Do you want soup? Mikoto asked, lifting the ladle from the pot. Yes, please, I replied, watching her stir the steaming broth. Have you gotten any news about Lord Fugaku? I asked, grabbing my soup. The question hung heavy in the air. Mikoto paused for a moment before serving the soup, her expression unreadable. He's still on the field. His time has been extended, Mikoto replied, choosing her words carefully. It meant most of the reasons behind why Fugaku wasn't here were confidential, or at the very least not for me to hear. The atmosphere took a dip. I thought it best to change the subject. So, do you know if you are giving Itaki a little sister or a little brother? The tension in the air lifted at once, replaced by a soft smile on Mikoto's face. She touched her belly affectionately, her eyes glowing with unspoken warmth and love. We don't know yet, and we want to keep it a secret, she confessed, chuckling lightly. But Itaka thinks it's going to be a little sister. Do you now? I said, a faint smile on my face as I turned to look at Itaki. Itaka looked up from his bowl, his eyes meeting mine with a soft smile. He seemed thoughtful for a moment before he spoke, his voice calm yet certain. Yes, I think so, a sister would be nice. Well, I'm willing to bet it's going to be a boy. Let's say, 12 orders of any food of your liking, I replied with a teasing grin. What do you say? Itaka looked thoughtful for a moment before a warm smile tugged at his lips. Deal. Let's see who's right, shall we? It doesn't matter, Mikoto exclaimed, laughing softly as she returned to the stove. Either way, the baby will be loved and cherished. True, but seeing I had the upper hand due to my meta-knowledge, limited as it was, I was going to make something out of it before it became obsolete. I would have bet more, but seeing Itaka's income is his allowance, I had to play with what I had. So, who wants some tempura fish? Mikoto asked as she moved to another pot simmering on the stove. The smell of fried fish filled the room, making my mouth water even more. Itaki and I shared a look before raising our hands in unison. 2 hands up over here. Chapter 8, Data Card, Arata Takeshi. This is an info/data card post. Having a few details about our protagonist up until Chapter 7. The following is a data sheet or card about what the village has about him. So some things you guys know as readers don't show in his data card yet. Name, Arata Takeshi. Age, 5 years old. Gender, male. Date of birth, April 17th. Height, 118 centimeters or 3 feet 9 inches. Weight, 24.5 kilograms or 54 pounds. Rank, civilian. Classification, genius. Kekkei Genkai, none. Affiliation, Konohagakure. Eye color, silver. Blood type, O negative. Weapons, dull katana, dull tanto, dull ninjato, shurikens and kunaus. Jutsu or abilities, fine chakra sensing, low tier mimicry, preemptive chakra sensing, clone jutsu, henge. Family. Father, Arata Yoshiro. Rank, retired jonin. Job, master blacksmith. Mother, Arata Mai. Rank, chunin. Job, Konoha's accountant. Now, starting this part, is things only you guys the readers should know, and Konoha has yet to find out. Kekkei Genkai, well, for those that don't know, he inherited Teresa's powers as a Claymore from the anime Claymore, but certain things were changed to fit into the current world. One of those changes is, that his Yoki is basically nature chakra. That being said, he can still awaken like a normal Claymore, including body changes and everything. He however, unlike normal Claymores, has another source of power, aka chakra, so awakening is much harder because nature chakra isn't the only thing circulating within him. So, basically while he can awaken like any other Claymore, he won't be as tempted like most Claymores are, because his body is different, and chakra itself keeps some of the side effects most Claymores have at bay, side effects he will only encounter once he uses this power. Secret power, he doesn't have any secret power, but he has a gift from the one that reincarnated him that he has yet to discover, but he soon will. Let's just say that this mysterious gift will aid him in understanding and mastering his powers. This gift is also the reason he lost so many memories. Info notes. 20 facts about the story. 1. Takeshi has no idea he got any powers. Had things been different, he would have figured out already, but most of his memories are locked, including the ones that would have helped him deduce what powers he was given. 2. Takeshi's personality was altered upon his reincarnation. A side effect of his rebirth. His personality is now a mix of Teresa of the faint smile, and his own. 3. Takeshi is 53 days older than Itaki. 4. One of Takeshi's possible love interest is 4 days older than him, her birthday is April 13th, try to guess who she is. 5. Takeshi heals much faster than most shinobis, faster than even Kurama's Jinchurikis, however, seeing he rarely gets injured while training with Itaki, he's unaware of this power of his being anything special, deeming his unnatural regeneration as something most shinobis have. 6. Takeshi is very smart, another side effect of his reincarnation and his connection to Teresa of the faint smile. However, when it comes to social situations he can be somewhat dense, not anime protagonist dense level, but enough to be noticeable. 7. Takeshi loves cats, and has asked his parents for a cat on multiple occasions, but they keep saying no. 8. Takeshi's favorite food is barbecue and anything tempura. 9. Takeshi eats like a normal kid, however, he never gets hungry, this is due to his Claymore physiology. If push ever comes to shove, he could survive on minimal amounts of food, needing only to consume a very small portion once every couple of days, being able to easily go a week without water or nourishment. 10. Mikoto adores Takeshi solely for the fact that Takeshi is Itaki's friend, so she treasures Takeshi like a part of her family for that alone. 11. Fugaku initially didn't like the idea of allowing an outsider to spend so much time with his son, however, he soon changed his opinion on the matter after seeing the two kids spar for the first time. 12. The Uchiha elders have mixed opinions about Takeshi, none of them are good, some consider Takeshi nothing but a tool to make the heir of the Uchiha clan grow stronger, others consider Takeshi a parasite trying to rise status using the Uchihas as a stepping stone. 13. Takeshi has 2 natural chakra natures, one for each part that makes him. Wind nature, for Teresa of the faint smile, and lightning nature for himself. Which begs the question if he can somehow learn swift release. 14. Takeshi hates bugs. 15. Takeshi has in general heightened senses, one of those being his sense of smell, however he rarely finds a smell he thinks as disgusting, that being said, he hates when people don't brush their teeth, finding that particular smell utterly revolting. 16. Takeshi's family is very wealthy for a clanless couple, most of this money coming from Takeshi's father, who is one of the best if not the best blacksmith on Konoha. Meaning his clients are usually the big clans, like the Uchiha. 17. Takeshi technically knows about root, not because of his meta-knowledge, in fact, he doesn't even know there's a Konoha force called root. However, due to his incredible sensing, he has caught wind of root agents, considering them puppets, mostly because he feels close to nothing in their chakra, so unaware of who they are, he thinks of them as puppets of some kind. 18. Takeshi never met Obito, despite living during the same time Obito was still in the village, before going all emo and stuff. 19. Takeshi hasn't forgotten about how to write in English or how to speak it for that matter, but unlike other novel protagonists he has no reason to start a secret diary, mostly because his knowledge and memories are heavily limited, his memory is borderline photographic, ironic isn't it? 20. I know we already talked about favorite food, but as far as favorite snack or dessert goes, Takeshi loves chocolate in any shape or form, and when given the opportunity he eats as much of it as possible, to the point his parents are worried he might develop diabetes, which is why they control the amount of chocolate that enters his life. This concern, however, is ultimately pointless, seeing Takeshi is physically unable to get diabetes, and many other diseases thanks to his unique physiology. The list of things he's immune or basically immune to includes but it's not limited to STDs, common cold, migraines, influenza, the flu, stomach problems, most poisons, and venoms. He isn't immune to them but his body can process them at an incredible rate, ranging from seconds to minutes, depending on the poison or venom. This trait of him can keep most effects in question at bay. Heart diseases, pulmonary diseases. To summarize, most of the things normal humans, even shinobis would be subject to. Well, that was all, and like always, remember, if you want to read up to 10 chapters ahead, go to https://www.patreon.com/cornbringer. Chapter 9, Data Card, Uchiha Ataki. This is an info/data card post. Having a few details about our Ataki, a shorter version of the one with our protagonist, and like with our protagonist, this data card is only valid until Chapter 7. Name, Uchiha Ataki. Age, 5. Gender, male. Date of birth, June 9. Height, 112.5 centimeters or 3 feet 7 inches. Weight, 20.5 kilograms or 45 pounds. Rank, Uchiha Heir. Classification, Genius. Kekkei Genkai, the Sharingan. Affiliation, Konohagakuer. Eye color, onyx. Blood type, Ib. Weapons, dull katana, dull tanto, dull ninjato, shurikens and kunaus. Jutsu or abilities, clone jutsu, henge, fire release, fireball jutsu, fire release, flame bullet. Note, don't confuse the Kekken Genkai line for him having the Sharingan already. Basically what the village is trying to say there, is that he's an Uchiha, the heir of the clan for that matter, so it's only natural to assume he will have the dojutsu. Family. Father, Uchiha Fugaku. Rank, Jonin. Job, head of the police. Mother, Uchiha Mikoto. Rank, retired Jonin. Job, housewife. Info notes. 7 facts about Ataki. 1. Ataki sees Takeshi as a kindred spirit. 2. Ataki wonders at times if Takeshi has a Kekken Genkai, finding his near unlimited stamina beyond the range of normality. 3. Ataki hates social gatherings. 4. Ataki and Takeshi already know how to walk in walls and water. Mikoto taught them. But I forgot to add this in the skills and abilities part. 5. Ataki is better than Takeshi at Shurikenjutsu, but Takeshi is better than him with Kenjutsu. 6. Ataki wanted to teach Takeshi the fireball jutsu, but he was forbidden from doing so by his parents to avoid the elders of the clan making a scene. 7. Ataki asked his father for a wind-style jutsu for Takeshi's 6th birthday. Fugaku at first said no, but in the end, the man crumbled, and promised Ataki to teach Takeshi an elemental jutsu before they are enrolled in the academy. And that's about it for the data cards. I will update them once our boys become genin, and like always, remember, if you want to read up to 10 chapters ahead, go to https://www.patreon.com/cornbringer. Comment. Chapter 10, Chapter 8, Redheads Are Evil. I sat perched on the edge of a rooftop, my legs dangling over the side as I watched the shinobi of Konoha return from the battlefield. The Third Shinobi War had finally come to an end, and those who had fought and survived were making their way home. The streets below buzzed with activity as villagers gathered to welcome back their loved ones. There was an air of bittersweet relief, joy for those who returned, and sorrow for those who did not. From my vantage point, I could see Fugaku Uchiha among the returning shinobi. He wasn't hard to spot. His permanently stern expression and strong posture were unmistakable even in the throng of weary, battle-hardened warriors. His return reminded me of the discussions I had overheard in the Uchiha compound about their growing interest in Sharingan under the possession of Hitaki Kakashi. It didn't take a genius to realize that the political drama brewing within the clan was palpable, adding to the tension that already hung over the village. I had to say, though, I was honestly impressed that the war had ended so quickly, far earlier than my shortest estimations. The war had both reached its climax and ended in the span of a month. Remember to buy some flowers for the ceremony, Itaki reminded me, his voice as calm as always. We have to pay our respects to those who didn't come back. Right, the burial ceremony. Will do. So many lives had been lost, and as a way to say thanks, the entire village would come together to pay their respects. It was a sobering reminder of the harsh reality I lived in, a world where strength and survival were paramount. As the returning shinobi made their way through the village, passing by the building Itaki and I were sitting on, I could hear snippets of conversations, expressions of relief, and heartfelt reunions. The war had taken its toll on everyone as expected, and it was clear that Konoha would need time to heal. It's finally over, I said, a sigh escaping my lips. Itaki nodded, his expression more serious than usual. Yes, but the challenges are far from over. We have much to do to rebuild and to honor those who gave their lives. That much was true. Thousands of lives were lost in the conflict, and while Konoha had come out on the better end, the price paid was steep, steeped in blood and sacrifice. I glanced around at the village, watching the tears, the pain, the sorrow, and the joy of each individual. Things won't be the same. No, Itaki replied quietly. Do you know when the ceremony is? I asked, turning to look at him. It's 2 days from now, Itaki replied, his gaze still fixed on the procession of shinobi. There's much preparation to be done. 2 days for a burial of this magnitude? I suppose that means there aren't many bodies to actually bury, making the entire event mostly symbolic. A pretty standard shinobi practice to avoid enemies desecrating the fallen for secrets. Still, it seemed cold, impersonal. But such was the way of war, I suppose. Aren't you going to greet your father? I asked, tilting my head. At this, Itaki's eyes lingered on Uchiha Fugaku, who was currently standing amidst the gathered shinobi, engaged in conversation with some higher UPS, no doubt discussing the aftermath and recovery. I will, he said simply. Later. Fair enough. As the procession of shinobi finally came to a halt and the crowds began to disperse, I turned to Itaki and gave him a nod. I'll catch up with you later, I said, a faint smile on my face, already thinking about where I might go to clear my head. Take care, Itaki replied, his eyes still following his father's movements. I slipped down from the rooftop and made my way through the village, a single thought clouding my mind. Would this last? I know it was a morbid thought to have, but I couldn't help but wonder if this fleeting peace would last. Shinobi history had shown that the gaps between the great wars were rather short, barely giving the village time to recover before another conflict arose. The village was barely 64 years old, and they had already suffered 3 wars. Would we be thrust into another war soon? The thought weighed heavily on my mind. As I wandered aimlessly, my feet led me through the Konoha marketplace. Vendors were already back to their routines, selling their goods to villagers and shinobi who were trying to return to some semblance of normalcy. Lost in my thoughts, I wasn't paying much attention to where I was going. It wasn't until I collided with someone that I snapped back to reality. Hey, watch where you're going! A woman's voice exclaimed. I looked up to see a striking red-haired woman with a fiery presence. Her violet eyes sparkled with annoyance and a promise of violence, but there was a warmth in them that made me feel oddly comfortable. Sorry about that, I said, stepping back and giving her a respectful bow. I was lost in thought. She waved off my apology, her expression softening as she finally realized I was a kid. It's all right. Just be more careful next time, okay? It's no big deal, you know. That, verbal tick, sounded remarkably similar to Naruto's. Maybe she's his mother, I mean, seeing she's the only Uzumaki in the entire village, it stands to reason she is. I smiled. You're Kushina Uzumaki, right? She raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised that I knew her name. Yeah, that's me. And who might you be? She's surprised I know her name? Why? She's the only person in the village with hair like that, and if that wasn't enough, she's the only Uzumaki in the entire village as well. There's hardly any room for confusion here. Arata Takeshi, I replied, giving her a small smile. I've heard about you from the other villagers. They say you're one of the strongest kunoichi in the village. Not entirely accurate, but Lady Mikoto did say on more than one occasion that Kushina was quite skilled in her area of expertise and overall very dangerous in combat. So while there isn't much talk about her outside a select few, I will take Lady Mikoto's words as the truth. Kushina chuckled at that, her laugh full-bodied and honest. What can I say? When they are right, they are. You know. She rubbed the back of her head in an embarrassed manner but didn't deny it outright. In fact, she looked happy. I suppose I do, I replied, just now realizing why Lady Mikoto held her in such high esteem. Kushina's chakra was utterly massive and overwhelming. It felt like a warm rush of wind, a force of nature that could not be contained. I could tell from the little interaction we had so far that her personality was much the same, fiery, passionate, hot-headed. I was almost certain she had the biggest chakra reserves I had ever felt in my life so far, outclassing even that of the Hokage himself. The weird thing was, that there was something wrong with her chakra. I didn't quite know how to explain it, but it almost felt as if part of her chakra wasn't hers. I could feel a knot. No, a knot wasn't quite it, I didn't know how to describe it, but I could feel something heavily limiting the amount of chakra she could access at any given time. You're a censor, aren't you? Kushina suddenly asked, her eyes locking onto mine. I nodded, slightly taken aback by her question. It wasn't a secret that I could sense chakra. Then again, I was hardly known by anybody yet, so. Don't worry about what you're feeling, Kushina continued, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. It's a clan thing. Oh, I see, so she's worried about what I might be feeling in her chakra. How considerate of her. But strange. Other than two different yet very similar chakra signatures and something holding one of the two chakras at bay, there wasn't anything worthy of concern for me. I wasn't worrying, I replied, a faint smile on my face, trying to reassure her I wasn't going to freak out or something. Wait, what did you say your name was? Kushina asked, narrowing her eyes slightly. Arita Takeshi, I offered up a small smile as I saw her eyes light up with recognition. Wait. I know you. You're Mikato's brat. Kushina exclaimed, a sudden burst of laughter escaping her lips. Ah. So you're the one she won't stop talking about. Her son's BFF. She talks a lot about you, you know. That would be me, yes, I replied, my words laced with the smallest hint of amusement. It felt nice knowing Lady Mikato spoke so fondly of me. You should come have dinner with me. You know. Kushina suddenly proposed, her eyes shining with excitement. I mean, all that chatting and you haven't even tasted my ramen yet. Well, this is an unexpected turn of events. As kind as your offer is, I'm afraid I can't. We are practically strangers, Lady Uzumaki, and well, my mother is waiting for me at home. Kushina snorted, rolling her eyes as she waved me off. Nonsense, any friend of Mikato is a friend of mine. Therefore, your mom is my friend, meaning we are not strangers, we are family. You know. Why do I have the strange yet oddly specific feeling that I'm about to get kidnapped? Before I could make a retort, Kushina's hand shot out and snaked around my waist. No more excuses. You're coming home with me. Today you will taste heaven. I will make sure of it. You know. She declared, her grip tightening ever so slightly. And stop with the lady thing, just call me Kushina. Today I will taste heaven? That phrase without context brings so many red flags that I might as well start communicating via semaphore. Chapter 11, Chapter 9, Expecting. A few months had passed since the end of the Third Shinobi War, and life in Konoha had slowly begun to return to a semblance of normalcy. The scars of the war were still very visible, but things were getting better, everyone was determined to rebuild and move forward. Today, like most days, my mother and I were making our way to the Uchiha compound for training. Training had been more intense since Fugaku had returned to the clan full-time, giving me the opportunity to hone my skills even further. Are you excited to see Itaki again? My mother asked, her voice breaking through my thoughts. I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. I suppose, though I'm mostly excited about the training. My mother smiled warmly, squeezing my hand. Whatever you say, honey. I raised an eyebrow at that. Was she doubting my words? I mean, sure I enjoyed Itaki's company quite a lot, but I enjoyed training even more. I wonder if that makes me a bad friend? As we approached the Uchiha compound, the large gates loomed ahead, the Uchiha crest right in the middle. Instead of the usual guards by the gates, we were greeted by Lady Mikato, who stood at the entrance with a warm smile on her face. Her belly was noticeably large, a clear sign that she was 9 months pregnant, and that Suzuki was on his way. My, Takeshi, welcome. Mikato greeted us, her voice filled with warmth. Hello, Mikato, my mother replied, returning the smile. It's good to see you. A pleasure to be back, Lady Mikato, I added, bowing slightly. Always so respectful, Mikato sighed, shaking her head. I've been trying for years to get him to drop the lady, but he never listens. How are you feeling, Mikato? My mother asked, glancing at her friend's swollen belly. I'm doing well, thank you, Mikato replied, her eyes shining with happiness. I'm due in 2 weeks. That's wonderful news, my mother said, her smile widening. You must be so excited. Mikato nodded, a beaming smile on her face. We are. Itaki is especially excited to have a younger sibling. He's been very attentive and protective. Very attentive and protective? That's the understatement of the century. In the last few months of Lady Mikato's pregnancy, Itaka had turned into a brooding hen, not letting Lady Mikoto do anything that could be considered even remotely tiring. During our last training session, I spent most of the day cooking for Lady Mikoto while Ataki massaged her swollen feet and ankles. Though, I suppose I did learn a few things that day, one of them being cooking. "Where's Ataki?" I asked. Usually, by now, he would have been out here already, eager to start our training. Or, considering Lady Mikoto's condition, he would be around her protecting her. "Oh, he's inside with Fugaku," Mikoto replied, waving us over to follow her. "He's having some lessons about the clan's economy and such, but he will be out in a few minutes." "Oh right, I had almost forgotten Ataki now has those types of lessons. They sound rather boring." As we settled into the garden and my mother and Lady Mikoto started chatting about mom-related things, a loud sound was heard in the distance. Uzumaki Kushina came striding into the compound, kicking doors open. Quite literally. That woman was loud. No matter what she was doing or where she was doing it, she would make it loud. I wonder if that's the reason she and her husband bought a house on the outskirts of the village, you know, to avoid disturbing the neighbors during their marital activities. "Mikoto. My. It's so good to see you both, you know." Kushina called out, her voice booming across the courtyard, making the few birds around flutter away in fear. "Kushina." Mikoto replied, her face lighting up even more. "What a pleasant surprise." Mai laughed, being the first to embrace Kushina. "It's been too long, Kushina. How have you been?" "Too long? You all had tea 2 days ago." Kushina grinned, placing her hands on her hips. "Busy as always, but you know me, I can't stay away from my friends for too long, you know. I still remember the day we first met, which is also the day she first kidnapped me. To this day, I still find the event quite strange, and even more so the fact she made a habit of kidnapping me to eat ramen together." Mikoto smiled and gestured towards the table in the middle of her garden, which was filled with an assortment of dishes, snacks, desserts, and drinks for them to enjoy, each item pregnancy safe, of course. "Well, you have good timing, Kushina. We were just about to start lunch." "Well, it's not ramen, but I suppose it will do," Kushina remarked, heading straight for the table with an enthusiastic grin. "How's Minato?" I asked as Kushina took a seat between my mother and Mikoto. "Ah, that man is as busy as a bee," Kushina replied with a roll of her vibrant violet eyes, though there was a sign of a smile on her face. "He's swamped with all these meetings and missions, but he's holding up well." "I'm glad," I replied. Namikaze Minato, or as his enemies call him, Konoha's Yellow Flash, the fastest ninja in the world. I still remember the first time I met the man in person. It was during one of Kushina's weekly kidnappings. I don't know why exactly, but that time he happened to join our table at the ramen joint Kushina likes to frequent, Ichiraku's. Since meeting Kushina, I've been asking myself a lot of questions about what little I know about this world and what is supposed to happen, but after meeting Minato, those questions just answered themselves, at least the questions revolving around the two. It was clear as day that they were, or would be, Naruto's parents. That revelation, however, brought a peculiar question to my mind. How had no one ever connected the dots about Naruto's parentage in the anime? There was absolutely no way everyone in the village had that low of an IQ. I understand that after Naruto's parents died, they had to keep his connection to them a secret as a protective measure, meaning that legally speaking, only a handful of Konoha's high-ranking shinobi were aware of the truth, including but not limited to the third Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, and his council. But even if the rest of the village wasn't privy to that information and the ones that knew about it weren't spreading the word, how in the actual hell had no one connected the damn dots? It wasn't that difficult of a puzzle. I mean, all someone needed to discover Naruto's parentage was a history book. Even if the book was edited to avoid giving it away, the only Uzumaki in our village was Kushina, and Minato was the only blonde in the entire village whose hair looked like it was colored by a yellow highlighter. And I can already hear someone saying, "But Takeshi, there's an entire clan of blondes in the village, the Yamanaka." And to that I say, no. The Yamanakas were more along the lines of silver blonde, while Naruto and his dad were more along the lines of radioactive blonde. I sighed. I suppose there's no point in trying to find the logic in something that hasn't even happened yet. Maybe after Naruto's birth, they use a jutsu to make everyone dumber, and everything just makes sense. I don't know, something like kinjutsu, extra chromosome, or something like that. That would explain a lot of the things I did remember, otherwise I had no idea how things like this could even make sense. Chapter 12, Chapter 10, Expecting, Part 2. I sighed. I suppose there's no point in trying to find the logic in something that hasn't even happened yet. Maybe after Naruto is born, they use a jutsu to make everyone dumber, and everything just makes sense. I don't know, something like kinjutsu, extra chromosome, or something like that. That would explain a lot of the things I did remember. As I continued to humor my silly theories, I felt two familiar chakras approach, followed by the sound of footsteps. Turning around, I watched as Itaki and his father, Fugaku, appeared in the garden. Itaki! Fugaku! Mikoto called out, her smile widening even more. Join us, we were just talking about you. Itaki walked over to me, a small smile on his face. Takeshi, it's good to see you, he said, giving me a nod of greeting. It's good to see you too, Itaki, I replied, returning the nod. Fugaku greeted the ladies with a respectful bow. Mikoto, Mai, Kushina, it's a pleasure to see you all. It's good to see you too, Fugaku, Mai replied with a warm smile. How have you been? Busy, Fugaku replied, his expression as always serious. But such is duty. He then turned his attention to Itaki and me. Boys, it's time for your training. Let's head to the training grounds. Itaki and I exchanged a quick glance before standing up. Yes, father, Itaki replied, his tone respectful. Of course, Lord Fugaku, I added, following Itaki's lead. Just as we prepared to bow our farewell to the women, a sudden sharp gasp echoed through the garden. Startled, I spun around to see Mikoto clutching the edge of the table, her knuckles pale. Her face had gone white, eyes wide with surprise and something else anticipation. Mikoto! Kushina's voice held a note of alarm as she too turned towards her friend. I think, it's time, Mikoto managed to stutter out, her other hand pressing against her swollen belly. A silence fell upon us all as we processed her words, leaving a single thought in my mind: Sasuke was on his way. Fugaku was the first to break the silence. Stay calm, Mikoto, he ordered, albeit his voice held an undertone of worry that I wasn't accustomed to hearing. We'll get you to the hospital right away. The hospital waiting room was eerily quiet, save for the occasional murmur of voices from down the hall. Itaki and I sat in tense silence, the air thick with anticipation. Fugaku paced back and forth, his agitation evident. It was a strange sight, seeing the typically stern and unflappable head of the Uchiha clan struggling to maintain his composure. I was starting to believe his only emotion was stoicism. Yet at that moment, he was as human as anyone I have ever seen, waiting, worrying, and hoping. Itaki, Takeshi, stay calm, Fugaku said, though it sounded more like he was trying to reassure himself. Everything will be fine. Yes, father, Itaki replied, his voice steady but his eyes betraying his concern. He glanced at me, and I could see the same worry mirrored in his gaze. In part, I understood why they were worried, but honestly, it wasn't that big of a deal when it came to the reality of things. Shinobi women are vastly more resilient than civilians, making their mortality rate at birth almost zero. In the rare occasions they do die giving birth, it's usually because they were super sick or something along those lines. In the particular case of Lady Mikoto, she was the epitome of pregnancy health. She followed a strict diet with everything being doctor approved, she took her vitamins, and never exerted herself, making her pregnancy a no-risk one. So, I wasn't worried. Not only did I know her pregnancy had been the perfect example of a responsible one, but in the unlikely case something else could have affected her, I would have known by now already, seeing that I could feel her chakra. It was completely fine. That being said, I wasn't going to be the one to tell them that. I didn't want Fugaku hurling out of the hospital through one of its many windows. Taking a deep breath, I leaned back in my chair, trying to distract myself by observing the room around us. The walls were painted a soothing shade of blue, and there were a few potted plants strategically placed to add a touch of life to the sterile environment. The nursery seemed to be a few rooms down the waiting room, based on the tiny chakra signatures I could feel in there. Baby chakra was different, like a drop of water trickling onto itself, becoming bigger and bigger drop by drop. How long do you think it will take? I asked quietly, not really expecting an answer. It depends, Itaka said, his tone calm. Childbirth can be unpredictable. That statement mostly applies to civilians, but I won't undermine his worry, at least not now. Fugaku's pacing slowed for a moment, and he glanced over at us. Your mother is strong, he said, his voice filled with a mix of pride and worry. She'll get through this. It was rather strange to see him so vulnerable. I didn't know what to make of it. In this moment, he wasn't the head of the police, or the head of the Uchiha for that matter, he was just a husband and father, worried about his wife and unborn child. The sound of footsteps approaching snapped me out of my reverie. A nurse appeared in the doorway, her expression calm and professional. Fugaku-sama, Itaka-kun, Takeshi-kun, she said, bowing slightly. Mikoto-sama is doing well. The doctors are with her now, and everything is progressing as it should. Fugaku let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Thank you, he said, his voice filled with relief. Can we see her? Itaki asked, his eyes filled with hope. Not yet, the nurse replied gently. But I'll keep you updated. Please, try to relax. Childbirth usually takes hours, between 10 to 24 for a birth without many complications. That statistic, however, applies only to civilian women. As for shinobi, there still wasn't a statistic for them, or maybe there was, and it was confidential? I wasn't sure. That being said, I had a feeling that we would be here for hours before the baby finally came. Shinobi or not, I doubted their birthing times would be that much faster. So the only thing we could do, was wait. Chapter 13, Chapter 11, Welcome Baby. By now, 6 hours had passed since we arrived at the hospital, and around 4 hours ago, Fugaku had been taken to Mikoto's room to be there for her and the baby, leaving Itaki and me alone in the waiting room. I could feel Lady Mikoto's chakra fluctuating every 3 to 4 minutes. At first, the fluctuations had been 10 to 20 minutes apart, but the more time passed, the closer these fluctuations got. Itaki sat next to me, his hands clasped tightly together, his eyes fixed on the floor. He hadn't spoken much since his father left, and I could sense the worry gnawing at him. So, as the good friend I was, I reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder in a gesture of reassurance. Itaki, she's going to be fine, I said, a faint smile on my face. Lady Mikoto is strong, and she's in good hands. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. I know, Takeshi. It's just, this waiting, I hate waiting without knowing. It's unbearable. I nodded, understanding his frustration. The waiting was indeed the hardest part, even if you knew that everything would be okay in the end. To not know something you want to know is basically torture. Why don't we try to distract ourselves? I suggested. Maybe talk about something else. Like our next training session. Your father mentioned we might start learning some new techniques. Itaka managed a small smile at that. Yes, father has been talking about that. He's been emphasizing the importance of mastering our chakra control. Exactly, I said, seizing the opportunity to steer the conversation towards something outside the current situation. And we've been making great progress. Remember how difficult it was when we first started? Now, we can maintain our chakra flow with ease. Itaka stared at me with an expression that all but shouted, "Are you kidding me? Difficult? You have mastered every chakra control exercise we have done almost immediately. Is that jealousy I hear?" I asked, tilting my head. I am not jealous, Itaki retorted, a flush creeping up his neck. I am frustrated, there's a difference. I honestly have no idea why you would be frustrated, I shrugged, leaning back in my chair. I mean, sure, I master the exercises faster than you, but not fast enough to leave you behind. What takes you hours takes me minutes, so by the end of each training session we remain on equal terms. Itaka let out a long, suffering sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose. You are insufferable, Takeshi. That's not even remotely fair. I laughed at his exasperation, nudging him playfully with my elbow. Come on, Itaki. You and I both know that once you awaken the cheat that runs in your family, things will change. His eyes flicked to me, a mix of amusement and exasperation crinkling in them. Cheat? He huffed, his lips quirking up as he finally allowed himself to be drawn into our silly banter. Is that what you are calling the Sharingan now? Oh, excuse me, and how would you call the thing that allows you to copy or memorize almost anything you see with a simple look? I asked, leaning in closer with a teasing grin. Because if that's not a cheat, then I'm not sure what is. Itaka couldn't suppress his chuckle. Very well, I'll concede your point. When you say it like that, it does sound like it's a cheat. However, while your point holds some truth, seeing as the Sharingan can indeed copy and memorize things, I won't agree with you calling it a cheat. The Sharingan is a tool, a gift passed down throughout the Uchiha clan by blood. Tool, cheat, gift. It's all semantics, really. I let out a laugh, shaking my head in amusement. The only reason you are not agreeing with me is because you know that by fully conceding to my point, you would be calling your entire clan a group of cheaters. I won't acknowledge that statement without my lawyer present, Itaka said with a smile that barely reached his eyes. All right, I chuckled, crossing my arms. I will be the first one to admit that even though your clan can copy things by just looking at them, they still need to train, otherwise, your eyes are basically useless. What I heard is, I was wrong, Itaki, please forgive my insolence, Itaki interjected smugly, raising an eyebrow. Shit, shots fired. Who would have known that the once quiet and overly polite kid would grow to have some bite? Taking a moment to fully appreciate Itaka's comeback, I let out a laugh, my hand clutching my stomach as I bent over with the force of it. Itaka merely stared, his lips twitching up into a rare, full-fledged smile. Then, the door to the waiting room opened, and a nurse stepped in, getting our full attention. The nurse in question had a calm and reassuring expression as she walked towards us. Itaka-kun, Takeshi-kun, she said, smiling warmly. Lady Mikoto has given birth to a healthy baby and has asked me to invite you two to meet the newest member of the Uchiha clan. The two of us? Well, I'll be. I thought this would be a more intimate family matter. I know Lady Mikoto says I'm family, but I always reckoned she meant more like a second cousin twice removed type of thing. She does says rather constantly that I'm part of the family. But most of the time I just assume it's a nice thing she says to show she's grateful Itaka has a friend in me, and even if that wasn't her intention, I certainly wouldn't have expected to be invited to what most people consider the most intimate moment in a family, after, you know, the whole birthing ordeal. We would be honored, Itaki answered before I could say a thing. I guess it's time to meet the baby. With a nod, the nurse turned, leading us through the sterile corridors of the Konoha hospital. As we walked, I noticed that the floors were polished to a shine, reflecting the dim glow from overhead, and the air had that peculiar smell, a mix of antiseptic and stale food that clung to the interiors of such places. I guess even here, hospital food is terrible. Murmurs of quiet conversation slipped out from the rooms we passed, accompanied by an occasional soft whimper or hearty laughter. I stole a glance at Itaki as we walked side by side. His face had returned to his usual stoic self, but his onyx eyes held a spark I hadn't seen before, a spark of eager anticipation that gleamed brightly. The nurse eventually stopped at door 404, her hand hesitating over the handle for a moment before she pushed it open gently. Lady Mikoto is waiting, she said, and then discreetly withdrew, possibly going to do something else around the hospital. As we stepped through the doorway, I was struck by the perturbing image of Fugaku smiling, almost as if he were in a daze. The room seemed to be bathed in a golden hue, its soft glow reflecting off the pristine white walls. A large window dominated one side of the room, revealing a nice view of the village framed by dense leafy trees. This room was far nicer than most of the rooms we had passed. I guess being the head of a powerful clan had its benefits. Nestled amidst the white bed in the middle of the room was Mikoto, cradling a tiny, swaddled bundle against her chest. Her straight black hair fanned out over the pillows, and her onyx eyes were softened with an unspoken joy that made her appear radiant despite her rather evident exhaustion. Beside her on a chair was the smiling Fugaku. His gaze was locked onto the bundle cradled in Mikoto's arms with an intensity that was almost palpable. Wait, he has his Sharingan active. Could it be? Oh god, that's just sweet, he's using the Sharingan to burn the memory of today into his mind. This man is layered like an onion. Itaki and I shared a silent look before he approached, his steps measured and careful, as if he feared any abrupt movement would damage his mom or the baby. Mother, Itaka began, bowing slightly at the waist in respect. Mikoto looked up, her tired yet radiant face breaking into a tender smile upon seeing her eldest son. Itaki, she murmured sweetly, her voice carrying a hint of exhaustion. Yet her eyes sparkled with a joy that seemed to brighten the room even more. I smiled at the scene, keeping a respectful distance from them, allowing the family to have their moment. Even if Lady Mikoto had invited me to be here, I wasn't going to overstep. I was happy watching everything unfold from where I was. I would meet baby Suzuki closer later. Takeshi, you can come, Mikoto gestured gently, her voice reaching me warm and inviting. Her gaze held something that I could only interpret as approval, maybe even gratefulness. You are family too. I hesitated, glancing at Fugaku for any signs of protest. His stern face softened with a slight nod, indirectly granting permission. Still unsure of my place in this intimate family matter, I slowly stepped forward until I was beside Itaki. Mikoto adjusted the blanket that protected the baby from the cool hospital air, revealing a tiny pink face nestled within. Itaki, Takeshi, meet the newest member of our family, the princess of the Uchiha. Uchiha Mito. My heart skipped a beat as the situation registered in my mind. Uchiha Mito, not Suzuki. This revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. Had I changed the timeline so much that Suzuki had been erased from it? The surprise must have shown on my face because Mikoto gave me a gentle, understanding smile. I know you expected a boy, so I suppose you owe Itaki some food, she repeated softly, smiling at Itaki. I forced a smile, trying to hide my inner turmoil. This changed everything. The things about the future that I thought I knew seemed now useless. Itaki leaned in closer, his eyes softening as he took in his baby sister. She's beautiful, he whispered, a rare tenderness in his voice. I will protect her. She is, I agreed, wondering what else my presence in this world had changed. I didn't remember most of the anime or anything for that matter, but the scale of the butterfly effect still worried me. Chapter 14, Powers. For those asking what powers does he have? This list has some answers. Superhuman physical characteristics, enhanced strength, speed, endurance, and reflexes. Excellent swordsmanship, highly skilled in using a sword. Yoki, nature chakra. You already know what this is. Preemptive chakra sensing, ability to sense chakra around him to such a high degree, it acts as pseudo-precognition. Technique mimicry, right now he has the lowest version of this, but in time he will be able to easily imitate other shinobi techniques, especially physical techniques, basically like the Sharingan but with talent alone. Regeneration, can heal from injuries faster than normal. Longevity, extended lifespan due to enhanced abilities and his status as a Claymore. Awakened power, potential to awaken greater power if using too much yoki, nature chakra. Shape-shifting, he will eventually be alter physical form to some extent. Elasticity and body control, he will eventually be able stretch limbs to great lengths and control body flexibility similar to some claymores. Anyway, enjoy. Chapter 15, Chapter 12, Kidnapping. The leaves of Konoha rustled a gentle tone outside the Uchiha compound, their shadows playing on the tatami floor as I knelt by the shoji, lost in thought. 3 months had passed since Mito's first cry cut through the silence of this world, a world that should have known another fate, a brother for Itaki, not a sister. My presence here, it seemed, had tipped the scales in unforeseen ways. Even now, I didn't know what to do with this change. I watched Itaki cradle the infant, his fingers delicate and sure. The touch of the prodigy ninja, feared and revered by some, now reduced to the softest caress against Mito's cheek. He hummed a tune, more felt than heard, a lullaby, to his little sister. His eyes, usually calm and collected, softened at the sight of her toothless smile. "Any, Mito," he whispered, and the baby kicked her legs in response, wrapped in swathes of cloth that bore the Uchiha crest. A sigh escaped me, an exhale of all the tension I didn't realize I'd been holding. It didn't matter whether or not this world was like the one I knew in the anime. I couldn't base my expectations on fragmented memories of an anime. This was my life now, a life that wasn't dictated by such a simplistic, stone-carved path. "She sure has you whipped, hey." I chuckled, watching the scene in front of me with a smile. "And it only took her 3 months." Itaki looked up at my words, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Perhaps," he replied quietly, returning his full attention back to the little princess. Mito gurgled, reaching up to grasp Itaki's hair, her small fists curling around the strands as if they were her lifeline. She cooed in delight at the sensation, her eyes twinkling in obvious fascination. "It seems she likes your hair," I commented. "Would you like to hold her?" Itaki's question caught me off guard. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. "Hold Mito?" I repeated dumbly, my gaze shifting from Itaki to the infant and back, before shrugging. "Why not?" Itaki carefully stood up, cradling Mito with practiced ease. He approached me, his movements deliberate and gentle, as if he were handling the most precious treasure in the world, which for him, she might as well be. Itaki extended Mito towards me, and I reached out, my hands steady but my heart racing. As her tiny body settled into my arms, I felt an unexpected warmth spread through me. Mito looked up at me with wide, curious eyes, her little fingers flexing and grabbing at the air, or trying to reach for my hair, one of the two, though my hair was shorter than Ataka's. "Hey there, little princess," I said softly, smiling down at her. "Nice to meet you." Mito blinked, her eyes focusing on my face. Then, she let out a delighted giggle, her tiny hands reaching up to touch my nose. The innocent, joyful sound was infectious, and I found myself chuckling along with her. "You're quite the charmer, aren't you?" I murmured, as she continued to explore my face with her little hands. "It seems like your brother will have to fight the suitors off you. Won't he?" Itaka frowned slightly at my words, his onyx eyes glancing towards me with a touch of concern. "That's not exactly a future I look forward to," he admitted, a hint of protectiveness seeping into his voice. "Don't worry, if you need help intimidating them, you can always count on me," I replied, tilting my head a little. "Though to be honest, your father will do just fine at the job without any help." Itaka snorted. "So, little princess, what do you say? Do you like me better than your older brother?" I asked the baby, throwing Itaka a smile, receiving only a mild glare in response. Mito's fingers brushed against my cheek, and she let out another gurgle of delight. She grabbed onto a strand of my hair, much like she had done with Itaka, and tugged gently. The sensation was strange but oddly comforting. "You've got quite a grip," I said, smiling down at her. I'm honestly surprised she managed to reach my hair. I have it quite short compared to you. Just as I was enjoying the moment with Mito, the shoji door slid open, and Mikoto entered the room. Her presence, as always, brought a sense of calm and warmth. She walked over to us, her eyes softening at the sight of Itaka and me with Mito. "Itaka," she began gently, "your father is waiting for you in his office. It's time for today's lesson about clan politics." Itaka's expression shifted to one of mild disappointment, but he nodded obediently. "Yes, mother," he said, carefully taking Mito from my arms and handing her back to Mikoto. As Mikoto adjusted Mito in her arms, she turned to me with a smile. "Takeshi, would you mind babysitting Mito for a few minutes while I take Itaka to his father?" "Babysitting? Me?" The thought was both daunting and amusing. I nodded. "Of course, Lady Mikoto. I'd be happy to. If the little princess needed a diaper change, I would find someone else faster than Minato's famed speed." "Thank you," she said, her smile widening. She gently placed Mito back into my arms, ensuring the infant was comfortably nestled. "I'll be back soon. Is it okay if I walk around the compound with her?" I asked. Mikoto's smile turned thoughtful. "Of course, as long as you stay within the Uchiha district." "Understood," I replied, clutching Mito a bit closer. Mito gurgled happily, seemingly content with the arrangement. Mikoto gave me a grateful look before turning to Itaka. "Come, Itaka. Let's not keep your father waiting." As Mikoto and Itaka left the room, I looked down at Mito, who was now grabbing at my hair again with her tiny fingers. "Well, Mito, it's just you and me for a while," I said softly, adjusting my hold on her. She responded with a delighted coo, her bright eyes focused intently on my face. As I watched her, I couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility and warmth. Babies were quite adorable, so much so that I kind of wanted to hit something. Is this what they call cute aggression? Walking through the Uchiha district with Mito cradled in my arms felt surprisingly natural. The district was quiet, with the occasional shinobi passing by, offering respectful nods and baby sounds adults make when faced with an adorable baby. "See that, Mito?" I murmured softly, pointing to a training ground where a few young Uchiha were practicing their taijutsu. "That's where your big brother and I train. You'll be joining us in no time, I bet." Mito gurgled in response, her tiny fingers clutching at the fabric of my shirt. Her eyes were wide and curious, taking in the sights around her. We passed by several houses, each with the Uchiha crest proudly displayed. The cherry blossom trees lining the streets were in full bloom, their pink petals drifting lazily to the ground. I stopped for a moment under one of the trees, letting Mito reach out to touch a low-hanging branch. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I said, smiling down at her. "This place has seen so much, and you'll get to be a part of it all." As we continued our walk, I spotted a small group of children playing near a pond. They waved at me, their faces lighting up with excitement at the sight of the baby. I approached them, allowing them to get a closer look at Mito. "Who's this?" one of the children asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. "This is Mito," I replied, smiling. "She's the newest member of the Uchiha clan." The children cooed and made funny faces, trying to get a reaction out of Mito. She responded with delighted giggles, her little hands reaching out towards them. It was a heartwarming scene, and I couldn't help but feel grateful for moments like these. After a while, I decided to head back towards the main house to see if Lady Mikoto was done with whatever she was doing. However, just as I started my way back to the main house, I felt a sudden, sharp pain at the back of my head. The world spun around me, and darkness quickly swallowed my consciousness. Chapter 16, Chapter 13, A Wolf in Sheep's Clothing. Takeshi POV. When I opened my eyes, I found myself tied to a tree in the middle of a forest. My arms were bound tightly behind me, and my legs secured to the trunk. I struggled against the ropes, but they held firm. The forest was eerily silent, save for the distant rustle of leaves. In front of me stood a man, his figure cloaked in shadows. He held Mito in his arms, her tiny form dwarfed by his large hands. Mito cried out, her wails piercing the silence, and my heart clenched in response. "Who are you?" I demanded, glaring at the man. "What do you want?" The man stepped forward, allowing a sliver of light to reveal his face. He was middle-aged, with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. "My name is of no importance," he replied, his voice low and menacing. "But what I want is quite simple. A Sharingan factory." I felt my blood turn cold at his words as I realized the motive behind this man's actions. He wanted to use Mito as a future brood mother, a breeding tool for the Uchiha's prized Sharingan. The thought was horrifying and repugnant. "No," I bit out, defiance flaring hot within me as a rage unlike any I had felt before surged within me, threatening to cloud my judgment. "I won't let that happen." A cold laugh erupted from the man. "Ah, the arrogance of youth," he taunted. "You think you have any say in the matter? Your compliance isn't a factor, brat." I clenched my fists, anger boiling within me. "If you harm her..." He cut me off with a harsh laugh. "You should be more concerned with what my plans for you are. I mean, haven't you wondered why I kidnapped you as well? I mean, I already got what I wanted if the Sharingan was my only goal with the baby over here, but yet I took you as well." "I couldn't care less," I replied, a faint smile gracing my face as I ripped the rope off, letting the rough fibers drop to the forest floor. My wrists were raw from the bindings, bleeding, but the sharp pain seemed an insignificant concern as I stared down my captor. "You will not leave this place with Mito." The man chuckled again, his gaze landing on my freed hands. "Impressive," he drawled, amusement flickering in his cold eyes. "But do you really think you can stop me? A brat who hasn't even started the academy." I didn't respond. Instead, I launched myself at him, my years of training propelling me forward with deadly speed. The man dodged easily, a smirk curling his lips as he shot out a punch meant for my face. I took it, feeling teeth loosen and dislodge from the force of it, blood bursting in my mouth and painting my tongue with a harsh, metallic taste. A sharp pain rippled through me, my vision blurring momentarily from the sheer brutality of it. What he didn't realize was that I was counting on his arrogance, his overconfidence in the fact that I was a kid without actual experience. So, as he threw the punch, hitting my face, his grip and attention on Mito faltered just slightly, a seemingly insignificant shift that gave me an opening to snatch her back. Now, I just had to run. "You little cunt," the man growled, realizing what had happened. I gave him no answer, already moving, sprinting towards the trees, baby Mito held tightly against me. I darted through the forest, formulating a plan, realizing that the gap between us and our captor was but a few seconds away from closing based on how fast his chakra was approaching. This wasn't a fight I could win, nor was it one that I could allow myself to lose. Pushing my legs to their limits, I wove through the towering trees, my mind working in overdrive to find a solution to my current predicament, coming to a single conclusion: I couldn't save Mito and myself. I had to pick one. I could almost chuckle at how few options I had in this matter. Taking my decision, I wove through another tree as the man neared me, creating two clones, before coming from behind the tree, immediately feeling a sharp kick from behind that slammed me into the ground. "The world, Jared," my face grinding into the rough earth. I tasted the dirt, blood, and grit between my teeth as the man dropped his boot onto me, his weight pressing my chest into the ground. Hot waves of pain radiated out from my ribcage, making it hard to breathe. I could taste blood at the back of my throat, a brutal reminder of how harrowingly dangerous the situation was. "Mito," I gasped, trying to reach for her. The man's coarse laughter filled the forest air, fracturing the silence of the evening. "I told you," he sneered, his voice heavy with satisfaction. "You can't protect her." I smiled inwardly. "I already had, you stupid, arrogant fucker." Right before he caught up to us, I created 2 clones, one that hinged into Mito, and the other, to take Mito away, and I managed to do all that, right before he pinned me down. I had to stay back for this to work though. If I had tried to keep him away with the clones, he would have realized, and things would have gotten out of control. The unmistakable sound of a clone poofing out of existence echoed in the distance, just where baby Mito had landed, and the man's grin faltered. "What? Eat shit," I managed to choke out, grinning through the pain. His gaze darted to the now empty spot where Mito had been only moments ago, his grip slackening on me in his bewilderment. That was all I needed, pushing back with every ounce of strength left in me, my elbow connecting with his gut in a solid blow. If I was going to die, I might as well go out hurting this fucker's pride as much as possible. He grunted, stumbling back as I rolled away from him, gasping for breath as I gained distance. His confusion rapidly morphed into fury as he scanned the surrounding foliage for any sign of Mito. "Where is she?" he snarled, spinning back to face me. Who knows? That's such a complicated question. I'm a magician," I replied, a faint smile on my face. "And we don't reveal our tricks. Enough with your games," he roared, lunging towards me. "Maybe she's inside your pocket," I taunted, willing to buy Mito as much time as possible. The baby's safety was all that mattered now. He nodded his hand into my hair, yanking me up and throwing a punch towards my stomach. I coughed, the air rushing out of my lungs as the force of the blow doubled me over. Streaks of pain lit up my vision, originating from where his fist had connected with my skin. I tasted blood again and knew without looking that my lip was split. "Where is she?" he roared again, no less furious than before. My breath came in gasps as I tried to push past the pain threatening to swallow me whole. "Have you checked inside my pockets?" His snarl turned feral, eyes blazing with rage. But I grinned at him, bloodied and battered as he yanked me upright, my feet dangling in the air. His grip on me tightened, fingers digging into the tender flesh of my arm with enough force to bruise. He used his other hand to pull out a kunai, the blade reflecting the light eerily. Gleaming steel bit into my side almost delicately, moving with a slow precision that made my stomach churn. I gritted my teeth against the searing pain but refused to give him the satisfaction of hearing me scream. I let out a harsh laugh instead. "Wrong pocket," I rasped out with a smile, blood dribbling from the corner of my mouth. Enraged, he didn't ease up on his attack even slightly. The knife cut deeper as he twisted it cruelly. Warm blood oozed from the wound and seeped into my shirt, staining it a dark, wet red. Each ragged breath I drew sounded like a death rattle in my ears, but a perverse satisfaction unfurled within me at the thought of having kept Mito safe, and the unfathomable satisfaction of cock-blocking this kidnapper. He pulled the kunai out, dropping me to the ground, and I gasped. The world spinning as my blood pooled around me. My knees buckled under me, but he held me up, his grip vice-like. "You'll tell me," he vowed, eyes glinting malevolently. But I offered only a bloodied smile in return. "Under your shoe, maybe." The furious confusion flickering in his eyes was worth the wave of fresh agony that engulfed me when he slashed the kunai across my chest. However, amid the scorching pain and creeping sense of finality, a strange sensation began to stir within me, a flame, a heat, a feeling of raw power that I had never felt before. It burned away the exhaustion, the fear, the pain, leaving only a chilling clarity in its wake. Images began to blur around me, my world tearing apart at its seams. As a golden light exploded in my vision, forcing my senses to expand beyond possibilities, a harsh, guttural cry erupted from my throat as the man lifted his kunai once more, ready to carve his rage into my very flesh. For the merest sliver of a second, my world tilted on its axis. I felt the shift before I understood it, an odd sensation prickling at the base of my spine like electricity arcing over raw nerve endings, followed by an overwhelming sensation of pleasure. And then, before even I could realize it, I was moving. Feeling better than I had ever felt in my life before, I grabbed the man's wrist that held the kunao, fingers wrapping around his wrist, twisting it like a twig until a sickening crunch echoed in the silent forest. The man jumped back, clutching his broken hand, staring at me silently. Your eyes. The coppery taste of blood filled my mouth as I offered a bloodied smile to my attacker. They are pretty, I know. I wasn't sure why the man was even mentioning my eyes, but I didn't care. I felt great, better than ever. I was high on something I didn't even comprehend. But honestly, I didn't care. The world around me was now a vibrant show of color and sound, each leaf rustling, every insect buzzing, the soft hum of the wind whispering to the trees. And there was the man before me, his heartbeat pounding in my ears like an irresistible symphony drawing me in, begging me to kill him. Before he could react, I lunged forward. His eyes widened in surprise, but it was too late for him to evade my attack. My fingers closed around his throat as I slammed him against a tree trunk, before ripping his throat out with a swift, brutal movement. His eyes widened grotesquely as gasps gurgled out from the open wound that was once his throat. Blood splashed onto my face as he fell like a puppet with its strings cut, crumpling onto the forest floor. I laughed, brushing my blood-covered hair back. If you keep releasing that much yoki, you will awaken, I heard a voice echo in my head. It was neither threatening nor comforting, in fact, the voice seemed amused. No wonder they got rid of the male generation, you guys simply cannot contain yourselves. Who are you? I growled, glancing around the forest, only to find no one around. You inherited my powers but you don't even know who I am, my, I feel insulted. Was I hallucinating? No, you're not, unfortunately. And as for who I am, allow me to introduce myself. My name's Teresa, and I'm inside your head. Chapter 17, Chapter 14, Teresa of the Faint Smile. My, didn't you hear what I just said? You're releasing far too much yoki, Takeshi, Teresa's voice echoed in my mind, cutting through the haze of power and confusion. You need to stop the flow of energy before it's too late. I glanced around, expecting to see her, but the forest remained empty except for Mito in the distance and me. Where are you? I muttered, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. How can I hear you? Didn't I just tell you that I'm not really here? Teresa's voice explained, calm and steady. I'm in your head, whether or not you can see me depends on how sane you still are. It's a long story, and one that I'd be happy to explain later. Right now, however, you need to focus on stopping the yoki. Yoki? What in the hell is that? You know what, I don't care. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. How do I do that? I asked, my voice trembling with the effort to control the raging power within. Focus on drawing the energy back in, Teresa instructed. Visualize your power as a stream of water flowing out of you. Now, imagine turning off the faucet, stopping the flow. Closing my eyes, I tried to picture the energy as she described. The power I had just awakened felt wild and untamed, like a torrent threatening to sweep me away, but it also felt pleasurable, unimaginably so. However, for some reason, I had a feeling that it was in my best interest to trust this woman, so I concentrated on turning off the flow as she put it, pulling the energy back into myself, inch by inch. That's it, Teresa encouraged calmly. Slow and steady. You can do this. The burning yet pleasurable sensation began to fade, the wild energy retreating as I regained something I wasn't even aware I had lost, my control. My breathing steadied, and the trembling in my limbs subsided. Slowly, the forest around me came back into focus, my senses returning to normal. There you go, Teresa's voice said, a note of approval in her tone. You did it. I opened my eyes, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and relief. What just happened? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You tapped into your yoki, Teresa explained. It's a powerful energy source, but it's dangerous if not controlled properly. You need to be careful, Takeshi. I nodded, still trying to wrap my mind around the experience. Why are you in my head? I asked, needing to understand. It's complicated, Teresa replied, and I could almost hear her hum deep in thought. I'm a part of you now, a guide of sorts. I'll explain more when we have time. For now, just know that I'm here to help. A guide? Right, she did say I had inherited her powers, meaning she's most likely connected to my rebirth into this world. But why now? I've been here for years, why appear now? I need to return Mito back to the Uchiha compound, I muttered, pushing my questions aside for the time being. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Teresa's voice called out, snapping me out of my thoughts. Claymore or not, I don't think you're in any position to be rushing anywhere right now. Ignoring her warning, I forced myself to move towards Mito's location. However, after taking only a few steps forward, an excruciating pain gnawed at my insides, forcing me to double over, clutching my stomach as a bout of cough overtook me, spattering the forest floor with blood. See? Teresa remarked with a soft chuckle. Your body sustained multiple injuries during your little encounter with your kidnapper. Most of them, fatal to most. I coughed out another splatter of crimson, my breathing ragged and uneven. Each attempt to gather myself sent waves of pain coursing through my frame. Just, great, I wheezed out, planting a shaky hand on a nearby tree for support. You will be fine if you stop pushing your body, Teresa added, and I could almost feel her smiling at the sight. And Mito? I managed to ask, straining my head to look towards the direction where my clone left her before being forced to dissipate due to the sudden change in my chakra. Thankfully, I could feel her from where I was, her chakra was steady, she felt a bit scared if anything, but all in all, she was safe. Mito is fine, Teresa replied, confirming my observations. She's unharmed and in no immediate danger. That was good, but not good enough. We were in the middle of the forest, anything could kill a baby around here. A snake, a boar, anything. I needed to ensure she would be safe before anything else. Good, I murmured, taking a deep breath. But I need to get back to her. Rest for a moment, Teresa advised. Your body needs to recover from the strain of your injuries. You won't do Mito any good if you collapse. I wouldn't do her any good if a fucking snake killed her, or a rodent or something. Ignoring her advice, I pushed myself away from the tree, gritting my teeth against the pain that flared with each movement. I don't have time to rest, I muttered, forcing my legs to move. We are in a forest and everything here can be lethal to a baby. Having said that, I began to move forward. Every step was a battle, my muscles screaming in protest, but I forced myself onward. The thought of Mito alone and scared fueled my determination. I owed it to her and her family to make sure she was safe and sound. Just a little further, I whispered to myself, my vision swimming. Hang on, Mito. Finally, after a rather painful process, I reached the spot where she was. Mito lay there, her wide eyes staring up at me, a hint of fear in them, one that seemed to vanish the moment she saw me. Smiling, I collapsed beside her, my body giving out from the strain, as I reached out a trembling hand and placed it gently on her tiny form. You're safe now, I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. I won't let anything happen to you. Big words for someone who couldn't kill an injured rat in his current state, but that was for me to know. You are quite stubborn, aren't you? Teresa remarked, sounding both amused and somewhat impressed. Comes with the territory, I responded with a grunt, wincing as a new wave of pain shot through my body. I suppose so, she mused, her voice softening slightly. You really care about this child, don't you? That was a loaded question, and one to which I didn't have an answer. But I suppose in a way, I did care about her. How much? I wasn't sure. She's important. I can see that, Teresa replied. It seems they are coming. Before I could ask what she meant, I felt it. A tide of powerful chakra signatures, familiar and distinctive, drawing closer with every passing moment. A smile dawned on my face as I recognized the chakra signature of Fugaku, leading the pack. Behind him, a sea of Uchiha shinobi followed closely. They would reach our location in a matter of seconds. Good, I smiled, coughing more blood onto the forest ground, as the world around me darkened, feeling a strange sense of peace knowing that Mito would be safe now that her family was on its way. With nothing to worry about now, my eyelids began to grow heavy, and despite my efforts to stay conscious at least until the Uchiha arrived, the exhaustion and pain overwhelmed me. The last thing I saw before everything went black was Mito's tiny hand reaching for mine, her innocent eyes filled with trust and warmth. Chapter 18, Chapter 15, The Root of All Evil. Takeshi's POV. I blinked awake, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling my nose. The ceiling above me was unfamiliar, white and glaring under the fluorescent lights. I tried to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through my body, reminding me of the ordeal I had just been through. You're awake, a soft voice said beside me. I turned my head slightly to see a nurse with kind eyes and a gentle smile, gazing at me. How are you feeling? Sore, I managed to rasp out, my throat dry and scratchy. Where am I? You're in Konoha Hospital, she replied, her voice soothing. You were brought here a week ago. A week? The last thing I remembered was collapsing beside Mito in the forest. Then, nothing. How's Mito? The nurse's smile widened, her eyes reassuring. The baby is fine. She was found safe and sound, thanks to you. She's with her family now. Relief washed over me, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Before I could ask any more questions, the nurse stood up and walked to the door. I'll get the doctor, she said, stepping out of the room. Moments later, an older man with graying hair and a stern but kind expression entered the room. He carried a clipboard and wore the typical white coat of a medical professional, accompanied by the Konoha headband. Ah, Arita Takeshi, he said, glancing at the clipboard before looking back at me. How are you feeling? Sore, I repeated, trying to sit up again but finding it difficult. My body felt like I had gone to the gym for a month without ever taking a break, every fiber in my being felt extremely sore. The doctor nodded, pulling up a chair beside my bed. That's to be expected, given your condition when you arrived here. You suffered multiple injuries, most of them fatal. Frankly, it's nothing short of a miracle that you're alive. I frowned. Had my injuries been that serious? I mean, sure, I hadn't been able to move freely after my fight, but I didn't feel like I was dying at the time. But I feel fine, aside from the soreness, and during my encounter with the kidnapper, I never felt close to dying. How is that possible? The doctor raised an eyebrow, a curious look in his eyes. That's what we'd like to know. Your anatomy is abnormal, to say the least. Your injuries should have been fatal, but your body has an extraordinary ability to heal itself, far beyond anything we have ever seen. Within a week, you recovered from wounds that would have taken months, if not years, for any other shinobi to heal if they survived at all, that is. So I have a healing factor? Well, that's awesome, or bad, it really depends on the regeneration in question. Some just forcibly multiply the cells in the body, which, sure, heals you but also lowers your lifespan. Others just regenerate endlessly without a downside. Hopefully, I had the second version and not the first. Regeneration, neat. Indeed, the doctor said, his gaze sharpening with interest. It's unlike anything we've seen. Your body seems to possess a remarkable regenerative ability. We're still trying to understand it. When will I be allowed to leave? I asked. The doctor paused, giving me a thoughtful look. Medically speaking, I have no reason to keep you here. However, given your unusual circumstances, I'd like to keep you here for a few more days, just for observation. We still don't know if this regeneration of yours has any side effects or downsides, and we would like to make sure it doesn't before releasing you. That made sense. I, for one, would like to know if my regeneration was something I wanted to use or to avoid. I understand, I replied, giving the doctor a smile. Hokage's office. Third-person POV. The sun filtered through the large windows of the Hokage's office, casting long shadows across the room. Uchiha Fugaku stood before the Hokage and the council, his expression stern. The air was thick with tension, each word heavy with the weight of recent events. Hokage-sama, Fugaku began, his voice steady yet filled with an undercurrent of frustration, have we figured out what happened that night? Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage, sighed deeply, his eyes reflecting the weariness of his years. We attempted to uncover the events by entering Takeshi's mind while he was in the hospital, he said, choosing his words carefully. However, every Yamanaka who tried to do so was immediately expelled, as if there was a force protecting him. They described the sensation as being cut by a blade faster than they could react. Fugaku's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. You tried to mind-walk him. His voice was low, dangerous. He's a child who saved my daughter, not a criminal. He should be treated as a hero. Sarutobi nodded, acknowledging the Uchiha clan head's concerns. You are right, Fugaku. Takeshi's actions were indeed heroic. However, given the severity of his injuries and the uncertainty of his recovery at the time, we needed to understand what happened while we still had the chance. Homura Mitokato, one of the council members, leaned forward. It was a difficult decision, but we had to consider the possibility that he might never wake up. We needed answers before it was too late. Danzo Shimura stared at the Uchiha. We didn't anticipate that Takeshi possessed such a powerful defense mechanism. It's unlike anything we've seen. Fugaku's eyes flickered with interest. Defense mechanism? Explain. Sarutobi exchanged a glance with his advisors before continuing. We believe that Takeshi possesses a Kekii Genkai, a unique bloodline ability that protected his mind from intrusion. This would explain why the Yamanaka were unable to penetrate his mental defenses. We also believe this bloodline is the reason he was able to kill the intruder. Fugaku's expression softened slightly, though his frustration was still evident. A Kekii Genkai? That would indeed explain much. The kid is a genius on par with my own son. But it doesn't change the fact that his privacy was violated. Koharu Udaten, another council member, spoke up. We acted out of necessity, not malice. Our intent was never to harm the boy but to ensure the safety of the village, which also includes his own safety. The Hokage raised a hand, signaling for calm. What's done is done. We must now focus on Takeshi's recovery and the implications of his abilities. He has demonstrated great courage and strength. We owe him our gratitude and support. Fugaku nodded, his stern expression softening further. Agreed. Takeshi has proven himself, and he deserves to be recognized for his bravery. I will ensure that he is given the respect and care he needs. Danzo leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. Yes, and we must also prepare for the possibility that Takeshi's abilities could play a crucial role in the future of Konoha. The kid has a bright future ahead of him. For now, though, we focus on his well-being and understanding the nature of his Kekii Genkai. The council members nodded in agreement, the tension in the room easing slightly. Fugaku's gaze remained steady, his thoughts now centered on the boy who had saved his daughter and the future that lay ahead for him. Root. Shimura Danzo. Third-person POV. Deep within the shadows of one of the root bases around Konoha, Danzo Shimura stood alone, his grip on his cane so tight that it splintered and broke, as his chakra flared out. His cold, calculating eyes were filled with a rare flash of anger. The dim light cast eerie shadows on his face, accentuating the bitterness etched into his features. Damn that boy, he muttered under his breath, the pieces of his cane falling to the ground. A child thwarted my plans. The Uchiha princess was supposed to be the leverage I needed. Danzo had wanted to use the Uchiha princess to push the Uchiha to act rashly, in turn giving him the reason to move forward with his plans. He had also planned to kidnap Takeshi to indoctrinate him into his route. Danzo paced the room, his mind racing through the implications of his failed operation. He had sent one of his operatives to kidnap the infant Uchiha, a brainwashed shinobi from another village, aiming to exploit the clan's weaknesses and gain a strategic advantage. But the kid had unexpectedly intervened, turning the entire plan on its head. Now I'll have to tread carefully, Danzo mused, his voice low and dangerous. Hiruzen will be on high alert. Any further attempts on the Uchiha or Takeshi will be met with high suspicion. He would need to lay low for a while. Despite the setback, a sly smile crept across his lips. But not all is lost, he thought, his gaze turning to the shadows where his plans and machinations thrived. This failure has revealed something valuable, a hidden gem in plain sight. Danzo already knew Takeshi was deemed a genius, but discovering the kid had a bloodline? That made him even more invaluable. It almost made this failure worth it, for now, he knew how much more valuable the kid was. The boy possesses extraordinary regenerative abilities and a mind that can repel even the Yamanaka, and that's just the tip of the iceberg if my suspicions are correct, Danzo thought, his mind already weaving new plans. If properly trained and conditioned, he could become an asset unlike any other. Konoha's greatest tool. Danzo's mind raced with possibilities. Takeshi's talents could be harnessed, and his loyalty secured. Root's methods were thorough, and Danzo was confident in his ability to turn even the most resistant individuals into obedient soldiers. Takeshi would be no exception. Then again, it was far too soon to decide if he wanted Takeshi as part of Root, or something else. Either way, patience is key, Danzo reminded himself. I must wait for the right moment when the boy's guard is down, and he is most vulnerable. Until then, I will watch and prepare. With a resolute expression, Danzo straightened, his anger giving way to cold determination. Takeshi Arita, he whispered to the shadows. You will be mine, and together, we will shape the future of Konoha. Chapter 16, Fugaku's overtime. It had been 2 months since the night of the kidnapping, a night that had left deep impressions on everyone involved, including me. The Uchiha compound had returned to its usual calm, though now security within the compound was amped up, which was understandable considering someone had infiltrated their clan and kidnapped their princess. For me, life had taken on a new rhythm as I recovered and returned to my training full-time. Fugaku seemed more involved in my training now. He had even taught me a few jutsu, 2 to be exact: wind release, vacuum blade, and wind release, gale palm. Perhaps it was his way of showing me his gratitude for saving the little princess. I hadn't seen or heard Teresa since that day, making me wonder if I had imagined the entire situation. This would make sense considering how much shock and pain I had been in at the time, though a part of me wondered why I would imagine a person I had never seen before in my life. In the end, it didn't matter. As far as my new power goes, I was now aware of it at all times. Ever since that fateful night, I had been able to feel this strange new power coursing through my body, dormant but waiting to be used. The sensation was alluring, almost as if it was calling out to me, tempting me to tap into its depths, like the call of a siren. It was not demanding, yet it beckoned me, whispering to me in notes of potential and power. The sensation would often creep up, tickling the edges of my senses in the quietest moments of dawn or in the middle of a particularly challenging training session. It was concerning, to say the least. I wasn't an expert in the matter, but any power so adamant about being used, to the point of being seductive, had to be bad news. "Are you okay?" Itaki asked, throwing a few dull shurikens my way. I dodged them deftly, my eyes still on him. Of course, I lied smoothly, though the concern in Itaki's eyes seemed to sharpen. He seemed to be able to read right through me, which was probably a side effect of spending so much time with him. "You seem distracted," he pressed, dodging one of my attacks before going through a series of hand signs. "Fire style, fireball jutsu." A large sphere of flame erupted from Itaki's mouth, hurling towards me with swift intensity, growing in size as it approached. I darted to the side, narrowly avoiding the heat of the fireball as it scorched the grassy training ground beneath us. The residual warmth brushed against my cheeks, and I tasted the smoky aroma of burning grass. Wind style, gale palm. A stream of violent wind erupted from my palm, cutting through the air with a hiss, colliding with the still smoldering grass and sending dust and smoke swirling into the sky. Itaki squinted through the cloud of debris, his eyes scanning the expanse for any sign of my movement. "Peekaboo," I said, appearing behind him, my hand reaching out to tap his shoulder. Itaki spun around in an instant, his hand already mid-swing towards my head. But I was prepared, swiftly ducking under his arm and aiming a low kick towards his stomach, pushing him back. "You win," Itaki admitted, a warm chuckle escaping his lips as he slid back, sandals skimming against the dewy grass. "That makes our current score 15-10 in my favor," I replied, a faint smile on my face. "Rub it in, why don't you?" Itaki grumbled good-naturedly, brushing the dirt off his shirt. His eyes held a glint of amusement as he gestured for us to take a break. "How is Lady Mikoto?" I asked, taking a seat on the ground. "Mother is fine," Itaki replied, smiling as he took a seat beside me. "In fact, she's pregnant again." "Again?" "But she had Mito a few months ago. I guess Fugaku is working overtime to keep the family line going. Good for them." "Again?" I chuckled. "I am not supposed to tell you, she wants to announce it tonight as a surprise," Itaki said, his lips curled into a conspiratorial smile. "But I thought you should know beforehand. That would explain why Lady Mikoto invited my family to dinner tonight, which wouldn't be strange if it wasn't for the fact she specified in her invitation that it was a formal event." I inclined my head toward him, appreciative of his gesture. "That's good news. Your father must be over the moon." Itaki nodded, his gaze drifting to the dancing leaves overhead. "Yes, he's quite excited. I guess Mito will have a little sister or brother to play with." "That's good. She needs the company. She has far too much energy for her little body, and at times she can be demanding. It's like she knows she can get away with anything. She's lucky she's adorable." "How is the little princess?" I asked. "Mito? She is as adorable as ever," Itaki replied, his eyes lighting up at the mention of his little sister. He retrieved a small wooden object from his pocket, a carving in the shape of a tiny bird. "I made this for her. She's fascinated with the sparrows nesting in our garden, so I took it upon myself to make her this." "Ah, that's just adorable. By the way, is there any chance I can recover my shirt from your sister's grasp? I asked, chuckling at the thought. 2 weeks ago, Mito had found one of my favorite shirts in the laundry room after Lady Mikoto had taken it to clean it for me, and for some reason, the little princess had decided my shirt would make the perfect baby blanket, stealing it from the laundry room in a baby heist. To this day, neither the shirt had been cleaned nor it had been returned to me. Itaka laughed. You can try, Takeshi, but I doubt it. She has become quite attached to it. I sighed, feigning disappointment. My favorite shirt, held hostage by a baby. Father thinks she likes your shirt because it makes her feel safe, Itaka continued. It must be infused with your scent, and it's rather comforting for her, considering how she fusses less and sleeps better. I smiled at that. Then I guess I have no choice but to surrender my shirt to the little princess. And it took you 2 weeks to realize that, Itaka replied, his eyes shimmering with amusement. So, how do you feel about being a big brother again? I asked. It feels strange, Itaka confessed, his expression thoughtful as he stared at the wooden sparrow in his hand. Mito is barely a few months old, and now there will be another. But strange as it may feel, I am happy. I like the idea of having another sibling. I hummed in acknowledgement. You do seem to enjoy being an older sibling. Do you want a boy or a girl this time? I would be lying if I said that I don't feel any preference, he confessed, his fingers tracing the intricate grooves of the tiny wooden bird. I think, a little brother would be nice. Seeing I already have a little sister, a little brother would make the pair. Why, do you want to bet and lose again? I chuckled, shaking my head. No, that's okay. I'm still paying the first bet. I'd rather just wait and see what happens. Later that night, as we arrived at the Uchiha compound, the house was filled with laughter and the delicious aroma of food. Everyone was wearing formal attire, including me, since my mother had forced me to wear a kimono. It was the perfect setting for Mikoto to make her announcement. Though I would have preferred not to wear a kimono, it doesn't matter if kimonos are also for men, they are very uncomfortable. I arrived with my mother, the excitement palpable as we were greeted by Mikoto at the door. She looked radiant, just as she had when she was pregnant with Mito, her happiness evident in every gesture and smile. My father hadn't been able to come due to being down with a terrible case of flu, deciding it would be best not to ruin the event with him sneezing every 2 seconds. Takeshi, welcome, she greeted warmly, embracing my mother. Please, come in. The others are already here. As we entered, I saw familiar faces, Fugaku, Itaki, who was also wearing a kimono, Minato, and Kushina, who was chatting animatedly with her husband, her vibrant red hair catching the light as she laughed. We found our seats at the long dining table, and soon, the room was filled with the hum of conversation and the clinking of utensils. Are you as uncomfortable as I am? I whispered to Itaki, who was sitting right beside me. He glanced down at his outfit, a slight grimace maneuvering its way onto his features. Undeniably so, he confessed in a low voice, tugging subtly at the stiff collar of his kimono. But it's a necessary sacrifice. I wouldn't say it was a necessary sacrifice, seeing the last time she announced her pregnancy I hadn't been forced to wear this hellish abomination of a garment. I felt like a porcelain doll, too stuffy and rigid. As we settled in, Mikoto eventually stood up, gently tapping her glass to get everyone's attention. Thank you all for coming tonight, she began, her voice filled with warmth. I have some wonderful news to share with you all. There was a collective silence as everyone turned their attention to her, eager to hear the announcement. Fugaku and I, she began, her eyes sparkling with happiness as she rested a hand on her stomach, are expecting our third child. A round of applause echoed through the room as Fugaku rose, wrapping an arm around Mikoto and planting a kiss on her forehead. Her face was flushed with joy as she kissed her husband back. But that isn't the only announcement we have for tonight. It isn't? Did Itaki withhold information about tonight from me? Curious, I turned my attention to Itaki, who seemed just as surprised as me. I guess he didn't. Kushina stood up, a playful smile on her lips. That's right. Because I am also pregnant, you know. Mikoto chuckled, shaking her head. You were supposed to wait for me to call you. Kushina waved her away with a hearty laugh. Ah, you know me, Mikoto. I've never been one for formalities. Kushina was pregnant as well? How far along are you, Mikoto? My mother asked, smiling. 2 months, maybe 3, give or take, Mikoto replied, smiling, her hand rubbing her flat belly. I just found out about mine, you know. Kushina interjected with a beaming smile before anyone could reply or even ask her how far along she was. The doctor said a week or 2. As everyone continued talking about the news, I remained silent in my seat, feeling a distinct sense of foreboding that I didn't know how to quite place. I just felt something bad was going to happen, and it was connected to this. The QB attack? I remember it was a plot point of the original series, but I didn't know much about it, other than the fact it happened long before the series took place, and that this event was what led the village to seal the 9 tails inside Naruto. I also remembered mentions of the 4th Hokage dying during this. But Minato wasn't the 4th Hokage yet. I needed to rearrange my thoughts. Chapter 20, Chapter 17, The Strongest Claymore. The following night, after the pregnancy announcement, I found myself drifting off to sleep. However, unlike most nights, this night I woke up suddenly, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was dark, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the window of my room. As I blinked, trying to adjust my eyes, I realized I wasn't alone. Standing at the foot of my bed was a woman with long, flowing blonde hair and piercing silver eyes. Her presence was both serene and unsettling, her gaze fixed intently on me. It took a moment for my groggy mind to process what I was seeing. Teresa. I whispered, my voice barely audible. The woman nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. And here I thought you had forgotten about me. Who? No, what are you exactly? I asked, narrowing my gaze at her. That would take quite a while to explain, so allow me to save us the time, Teresa replied calmly. At her words, a flood of memories rushed back to me, memories of a different life, of an anime I had watched long ago. Scenes of fierce battles, the tragic fates of warriors, and the stoic figure of Teresa herself. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks, and I struggled to make sense of it all. How are you here? I asked, my voice trembling with confusion and shock. This is the world of Naruto, not Claymore. And for that matter, how did you do that? Teresa's smile widened slightly, her silver eyes shimmering in the moonlight. I'm not really here, Takeshi. But I assure you, I am very real. As for how I did what I did, well, the answer to that is complicated. By just talking to her I had recovered memories of my past life, memories I didn't even know I had forgotten. Granted, the memories I had recovered were just about her world, but still. I have time. She stepped closer, a faint smile on her face. Very well then. As I have already told you, you inherited my powers, Takeshi. My very essence, talent and will became a part of you when you were reborn into this world. However, the one that put you here soon realized a little mistake on his part after giving you my powers. Do you know what this mistake was? I shook my head. Not really, but I assume you are about to enlighten me. Claymores are wonderful weapons, but ones with an expiration date, Teresa replied. Our power consumes us from the inside until we turn into terrifying monsters. It's never a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Without actual guidance, it would have been only a matter of time before you awakened, and that would have made your entire rebirth pointless. That explains your presence here, but not why you were able to give me back some of my memories, I pointed out. Yes, indeed, Teresa acknowledged, smiling softly at me. You see, when he realized his mistake, he decided that the best course of action would be to have the one from whom your powers come teach you how to use them without being consumed by them in the process. However, doing this came at a price. There was always a price in these types of things. I imagine the price was my memories. Teresa chuckled. In a way, yes. You see, a brain, especially one in development like yours, is not made to sustain 2 entire beings at once, so in order for me to exist within you, a part of you had to be locked away, so to speak. I was by no means an expert in the subject, but wasn't the brain able to carry petabytes of information without breaking? Are you saying your memories and mine were too much for my brain to carry? Teresa shook her head, seemingly amused by my reply. No, not at all. You are confusing raw data with consciousness, which are 2 entirely different matters. The brain, yes, it stores vast amounts of information. Each memory is but a speck in the grand scheme of that storage capacity. But the mind, our consciousness, is a far more intricate thing. It is not merely an assortment of facts and events strung together. It is a complex, dynamic construct of thoughts, feelings, desires, fears, and countless other particulars that make us who we are. And to adjust for the addition of my consciousness, your mind had to close off certain facets of itself. I felt myself frown at her explanation. You're saying that in order for your consciousness to exist, bits of me had to fade into obscurity. In a manner of speaking, yes, Teresa replied, her silver eyes holding an oddly apologetic glint. This wasn't an attempt to rob you of your identity, merely a necessary adjustment. And as you remember, it didn't happen all at once. So that's the reason why every day before my birth I would wake up with fewer memories of the past. Why now? Why appear now? I asked. If she had really been with me since my birth, then why wait so long to show herself? And just like that, we are back to the being that brought you here, Teresa replied with a faint smile. In his words, he set up something like a trigger event that would have to be met before I was able to communicate with you freely. Can you guess what this event was? Had that bastard orchestrated the kidnapping of Mito just for me to be able to communicate with him? No, calm down and analyze the information given to you. Don't jump to conclusions just because you want to blame someone. If the kidnapping had been the trigger, I would have been able to see Teresa sooner, but I had only been able to see her after. I tapped into that power. Tapping into my yoki, right? I replied after a moment. Teresa nodded, a flicker of approval flashing in her eyes. Yes, drawing upon your yoki fully for the first time was the event needed for me to be able to talk with you. Your power and mine are intrinsically connected, you see. When you awakened that part of yourself, you also opened the path to me, allowing me access to your senses as your consciousness adapted. I guess that makes sense. Wait, if I had inherited her powers, which in turn makes me a Claymore, does that mean I have monster flesh inside of me? No. I didn't have any scars on my body, and the doctors didn't seem to find anything out of the ordinary when I was in the hospital 2 months ago. Not only did I not have a nasty open wound in my chest like every Claymore had, but I also wasn't blonde like them as well. Meaning there were some differences between them and me. There was also the fact yoki, in the Claymore universe, was described as a demonic energy of some kind, a source of power born from hatred. However, when I used my yoki, it felt more animalistic and primal in essence than anything else. You are drawing the differences between our powers, aren't you? Teresa asked, watching me pensively. I nodded, my gaze finding hers. There's definitely a difference between our power if my memories of your world are to be trusted. Yours seems to come from hatred, but mine feels more natural, Teresa finished for me, seemingly pleased with my conclusion. Yes, that is one of the fundamental differences. The being that brought me here explained that your powers had been adapted to fit into this world's system without losing the fundamental essence of my own. He explained something about nature chakra being a perfect replacement for yoki, and how your physique differs from a normal Claymore. Nature chakra? That was a thing? This world is different from mine in more ways than one. With chakra alone, you've been able to surpass multiple warriors from my world in terms of raw power, Teresa continued, a smile on her face. That alongside the physical benefits of being a Claymore, well, it makes you quite the potential little monster. Everyone in this world is capable of using chakra, allowing most people to do feats no one in your world but a select few should be able to accomplish, I replied, nodding at her. The humans of this world are stronger, faster, and more dangerous than the ones in yours. Some more than others. Teresa nodded. Indeed, your teacher, Fugaku is it? Seems quite skilled. I would have loved to fight him. But that's beyond the point, after all, I'm sure you are wondering just how much different than us you are. I was, considering most of the memories I had from her world seemed rather depressing. Feel free to shed some light on my doubts. Teresa chuckled at that. I'm not entirely sure how different you are from us, but so far I know a few things. 1. Your body is fundamentally different from ours, your powers come from a genetic design, not an experiment in progress like ours. 2. You seem to lack the side effect of passive awakening, your yoki has been with you since the day you were born, yet you were never tempted to use it. And even though now you are able to feel it, you are not having to fight against it. Maybe it has something to do with this energy you call chakra, which seems to keep most of the problems yoki brings at bay. That relaxes me a bit. Passive awakening in her world seemed like a death sentence, one I wasn't exactly eager to deal with. Having to live knowing that day by day you were closer to losing your mind was a terrifying concept. Though, if her assumption about my chakra keeping that little problem away was true, did that mean that if I ever ran out of chakra I would have to deal with the situation like any other Claymore? I would have to test that hypothesis later. 3. Your personality seems to be a result of my personality and yours combined, Teresa continued, getting my attention. I don't know why exactly this happened, but I suppose it has to do with the fact that most of what I am able to do requires me to have a calm and collected mind at all times. One of the reasons Claire was never able to master my powers was because her personality and mine were completely different on a fundamental level, making it near impossible for Claire to master my skills. That makes sense. Teresa and Claire were two opposites. One reigned by her emotions, the other out of touch with them, one always calm, the other always worried, one confident, the other always doubting her own power. And that's about all the differences I could find, Teresa said, crossing her arms. The last one wasn't a difference, but I felt like I had to add it there. In short, Takeshi, you are what the organization dreamed of creating, a perfect Claymore. So does that mean I can't awaken? I asked, making Teresa chuckle. Oh no, you can still awaken if you use too much yoki, Teresa replied, shaking her head. Like any other Claymore, if you go over the limit you will become an awakened being, but unlike the rest of us, you don't have to be worried about the passive decay that leads to awakening. Good to know, I sighed, leaning against one of my pillows. How much yoki did I use the night we met? Around 10%, Teresa replied without missing a beat. Though at the rate you were releasing it, it would have overtaken you in a matter of minutes. The realization sent a shiver down my spine. Had I been that close to becoming a monster? That's comforting, I said sarcastically, earning another soft chuckle from Teresa. Now, about why I'm here, Teresa continued, her tone turning more serious. The entity that reincarnated you, giving you my powers, offered me a deal after my final battle with Priscilla. Needless to say, it was a deal I couldn't refuse. I looked at her, curiosity piqued. A deal? What kind of deal? Teresa's expression softened, a hint of nostalgia and longing in her eyes. I was given a chance to continue my existence back in my world, and all I had to do in order to do so, is train you. So once you're done, you'll be back to your world, I replied. Exactly, Teresa confirmed. My role in your life is rather simple. Teaching you how to be the strongest Claymore. After all, if you are to be my successor, you can't settle for anything less than being the best. I wouldn't say no to some free training, especially from the strongest number one of all the Claymores. Teresa of the faint smile. And as an added bonus, I am almost certain that once my job here is done and I leave, you will recover what you lost in order to allocate my entire being inside your head, Teresa added, her eyes staring into mine. Though don't get your hopes up, chances are some memories will never return, even after I'm gone, but it's better than nothing. I'm not really interested in my memories, I replied, offering her a faint smile. I can't really miss what I don't remember, so whether or not they come back is unimportant. Perhaps my thoughts on the matter would change if I ever recovered those memories, but right now, I couldn't care less about them. I was happy with who I was, and that was all that mattered.
Thanks for listening.